Victor Hale did not ride in with warning. He came at first light, when the snow was still falling soft and the families on Broken Creek hadn't yet pulled on their boots. 17 men, armed, and he sat his horse in front of Thomas Reed's farmhouse like a man who had already decided how the morning would end. Thomas came out onto the porch holding his infant daughters, one in each arm, because his wife Clara was still inside, because he thought maybe he could talk to the man, because he still believed that year that talking was possible. Hale didn't dismount. He just looked down at Thomas and said, "You had until yesterday." Thomas said, "My girls, please. Let me put my girls inside." Hale nodded to the man on his left. That was all it took. A nod. If you had been standing in that snow, watching a father beg for 30 seconds to set his daughters down safely, and watching the man on the horse refuse it with nothing more than a slight turn of his chin, what would you have done? What could you have done? Stay with this story, because what happened next on Broken Creek did not end in that yard. It traveled 17 miles through a killing blizzard, wrapped inside a dying man's coat, and landed in Evelyn Carter's barn before dawn had fully broken. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single chapter of what came next. Hit that like button, and drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. The storm had been building for 3 days before it finally broke. Evelyn had known it was coming the way she knew most things about Wyoming weather. Not from any particular sign in the sky, but from the way her horses went quiet. They stopped moving around in their stalls the evening of the second day, standing still with their ears laid flat. And Evelyn had spent that night awake at the kitchen table listening to the wind pick up speed outside the walls of her house. By morning, the temperature had dropped 30 degrees and the snow was coming sideways. She was not afraid of storms. She had weathered 4 winters alone on this ranch since her husband Daniel had died of a fever that the doctor and Casper had failed to diagnose correctly. And she had learned in that time that fear of weather was useless. You prepared or you didn't. The storm came regardless. What she had not prepared for was what she found in her barn at 6:30 in the morning when she went to check on her animals. She heard the sound before she opened the door. Something low and ragged, not quite a groan, not quite a cry. She stopped with her hand on the barn latch and stood there in the dark for a moment, the cold cutting through her coat, the lantern she carried throwing a small orange circle in the black. Animals made sounds in storms. She told herself that. Then she heard it again, and she knew it wasn't an animal. She pulled the latch and pushed the door open. He was on the floor of the barn, wedged between the wall and the first stall, and he had his coat wrapped around something, 2 somethings, pressed flat against his chest. His face was turned sideways against the hay, and his lips had gone a color that was not a good color. There was blood frozen in his hair and blood soaked through the shoulder of his coat, dark and already stiff from the cold. His eyes were closed. Evelyn did not scream. She was not a woman who screamed. She crossed to him in 4 steps, set the lantern down, and crouched beside him. She put her fingers against the side of his throat and felt a pulse. Slow, too slow, like a clock that was almost wound down. And then she pulled back the edge of his coat to see what he was carrying. 2 infants. Both girls from the look of them, both swaddled in what appeared to be a man's shirt torn into strips, both impossibly small and impossibly still. Evelyn's heart locked in her chest. She pressed her hand gently against the nearest one's back, and the baby shifted and made a sound. Thin, exhausted, but alive. Both of them were alive. She reached for the second child and the man's arm came up without warning. He grabbed her wrist. His eyes were open now, wild and red-rimmed and full of a fear that wasn't about her, wasn't about the barn. It was about something he'd already seen that she hadn't. His grip was stronger than it should have been for a man who looked like he was dying. Don't. The word came out of him like gravel. "I'm trying to help them," Evelyn said. She didn't pull away. She kept her voice level the way she kept it level when a horse was panicking, low even, offering nothing to push back against. "They need to be warm. I have a fire inside." He stared at her. His chest was moving in short, uneven pulls. "They'll kill you too," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Let's get you all inside first," she said. "Then you can tell me who's going to kill me." His grip loosened, not because he trusted her. She could see he didn't, but because he didn't have anything left to hold on with. His arm dropped back across the baby's and his eyes slid half shut, and Evelyn moved fast. She got the infants out of his coat one at a time, tucking each against her own chest while she carried them to the barn door and set them in the only place that made sense, a clean feed crate lined with straw that she dragged from the corner, close enough to the door that she could see them while she went back for the man. She stripped off her outer coat and laid it over them. The nearest baby turned her head and made that thin sound again. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Getting the man inside was harder. He was large, broad through the shoulders, probably 200 pounds before whatever he'd been through had stripped weight off him. And he was barely conscious. She got him upright by sheer stubbornness, pulling his arm across her shoulders and half dragging him to his feet while he made sounds she suspected he would have been embarrassed by if he'd had the strength for embarrassment. He stumbled. She caught him. His head dropped forward. "Stay with me," she said. He didn't answer. She got him to the house in 2 trips. Him first, baby second, back through the snow with the crate held against her chest and the wind trying to tear it out of her hands. She kicked the door shut behind her and stood in her own kitchen for a moment, breathing hard, the crate on the table and the man on the floor by the fire where she'd left him, and she thought, I have no idea what I just brought inside. She built the fire up first, then she saw to the babies. They were older than she'd initially thought. Maybe 4 months, maybe 5, hard to say. Both had dark hair and the same shape of face, and they were thin in a way that worried her. She found the jar of cow's milk she kept in the cold box and warmed it by the fire and fed them as best she could with a cloth twisted into a point, letting them suck the milk from it while she held them, one at a time. The first ate eagerly, desperate. The second took more coaxing. The man on the floor watched her the whole time. She could feel his eyes, even when she wasn't looking at him. She got both babies settled in the crate by the hearth, warmer now, full enough to sleep, and then she turned to deal with him. His wound was bad. The bullet had entered the back of his left shoulder and either passed through or was lodged deep enough that she couldn't see an exit point clearly without better light and better instruments than she had. She'd dealt with worse on this ranch. A hand who'd gotten a fence post through his thigh, Daniel in the last months before his fever when she'd done everything the doctor should have done. But a gunshot was a different matter, and she was not a doctor. She cut his coat and shirt away with the kitchen shears. He hissed through his teeth when she peeled the fabric from the wound. "How long have you been carrying that?" she asked. "Since before dark," he said. She looked up. "Yesterday?" He didn't answer, which was an answer. She got the lamp close and looked at the wound properly. The bullet had gone through. She found the exit wound when she eased him forward, smaller than she'd expected, and she thought maybe that was the only piece of luck he'd had in the last 24 hours. She cleaned both openings with the whiskey she kept in the cabinet above the stove, and when she pressed the cloth to the exit wound, he made a sound through his teeth, but didn't reach for her hands, didn't try to stop her. "What's your name?" she said. A pause. "Nathan." "Nathan what?" Another pause, longer. "Cole." She didn't react to that. She'd heard the name, so most people in this part of Wyoming had, but she kept her hands moving and her face still. "Those babies," she said. "Who are they?" "Thomas Reed's daughters." His voice was flat. Not flat the way a man sounds when he doesn't care. Flat the way a man sounds when he's trying to carry something without letting it break him. His name was Thomas. His wife was Clara. They had a place on Broken Creek. Had. Evelyn heard the word. "What happened?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Victor Hale happened." She tied off the bandage and sat back on her heels. The fire was loud between them. Both babies were asleep in the crate, their breathing visible in the small movements of their chests. "Hale took the land?" "Hale took everything." Nathan's eyes were on the crate, not on her. Thomas had a water right that Hale wanted. He'd been trying to buy it for 2 years. Thomas wouldn't sell, so Hale stopped asking. She didn't push him. She could see what it was costing him to say even this much, and she had learned a long time ago that men talked when they were ready and not before. She went to the stove and put water on for coffee, and when she came back, she sat in the chair by the fire and waited. He told her the rest in pieces, the way a man tells a story he'd rather not be telling. He had known Thomas Reed for 8 years. They'd been something close to friends in the years when Nathan had run with Marcus Doyle's outfit, which Evelyn understood meant the years when Nathan Cole had been operating outside the law in a significant way. But he told it plainly, without flinching from it, and she respected that. He'd left Doyle's gang 4 years ago, after a job in Colorado that he said he wouldn't describe in detail, but that he said had been the last thing he was willing to be part of. He'd drifted north and taken work where he could find it. Legitimate work, he said, though he said it with a kind of exhaustion in his voice that suggested he knew how it sounded. He'd stayed in loose contact with Thomas, who was the only person from that earlier life who had built something worth building and who had never asked Nathan to be anything other than what he was trying to become. 3 weeks ago, Thomas had sent him a letter. It said that Hale's men had started riding the fence lines. That 2 of his neighbors had already sold under pressure. That he was scared, but he wasn't going to move. Nathan had ridden for Broken Creek immediately. He'd arrived yesterday morning. Late, it turned out. Too late for Thomas and Clara, who were already gone by the time he got there. The house was still burning. Hale's men were still in the yard. He'd found the babies in the root cellar behind the house, wrapped in blankets and hidden there by someone. Thomas or Clara, in the minutes before the end. And he'd taken them and run. He said this without any particular drama. Just found them, took them, ran. But his jaw was working, and there was something in his face that he was not going to let himself show. And Evelyn looked away to give him the privacy of it. Hale's men tracked you here? She said. They will, he said. They were a few miles back when the storm came down. But yes, they'll track me here. She was quiet for a moment. You should have kept riding. I couldn't. He looked at the babies. They needed warmth. They needed food. He stopped. He looked down at his hands. I wasn't going to make it much further. The honest admission of that seemed to cost him something. She didn't point it out. How many men does Hale have? She said. On his payroll? 40, 50. Riding out in weather like this? He considered. 6, maybe 8. He'll send enough to do the job and not so many that the storm kills half of them. Evelyn looked at the window. Outside, the snow was still coming hard, whitening everything, filling in tracks. They won't move until the worst of it passes, she said. That gives us some hours. Gives us hours to do what? He said. There's 2 of us, miss. Carter, she said. Evelyn Carter. And there's 2 of us with a barn full of weapons and a ranch that I know better than any man Hale could send. He looked at her directly for the first time since she'd brought him inside. She met the look without blinking. I didn't come here to get you killed, he said. You didn't come here at all, she said. You fell down in my barn. I made the choice to bring you in. That's different. He didn't have anything to say to that. She stood and went to the window, looking out at the white nothing of the yard. Behind her, one of the babies stirred in the crate, and she heard Nathan shift and say something low that wasn't words. Just sound, just presence. And the baby settled again. She stood there with her arms crossed over her chest and thought about what it meant that he'd done that. That his first instinct, even hurt and exhausted as he was to reach for those children. She thought about Thomas Reed, who she had never met, who had hidden his daughters in a root cellar and probably knew when he did it that it was the last thing he would ever do for them. She thought about the kind of man who did that, who looked at the worst possible moment of his life and thought first about his children, not about himself. She thought about the kind of man who then ran 17 miles through a killing blizzard with 2 infants pressed against his chest, bleeding from a hole in his shoulder, and who even when he was barely conscious on the floor of a stranger's barn would not let go. She had spent 4 years building walls around herself and calling it strength. She understood now, standing at the window with the storm still raging outside, that those walls were not strength at all. They were just walls. She turned around. Nathan, she said. He looked up. Can you hold a rifle? She said. He thought about it. Not performing thought, actually thinking, assessing what his shoulder would and wouldn't do. Yeah, he said. I can hold one. Good, she said. Rest while you can. I'm going to go check the fence lines and figure out which way they'll come in. In this weather? In this weather, she said. The snow reads. You can see where it's been disturbed if you know what you're looking for. She went to get her coat from the hook by the door. You know Victor Hale. I know this land. That's what we have. He watched her pull the coat on. His face was hard to read. There was something in it that wasn't quite suspicion and wasn't quite gratitude, something in between those 2 things that hadn't found its name yet. Why? He said. She stopped with her hand on the door latch. She thought about what he was actually asking. Not why are you helping me, which she understood. A wounded stranger was a complicated thing to offer shelter to. He was asking something harder than that. He was asking, why does any of this matter to you? She looked at the crate by the fire, at the two small faces turned sideways in sleep, their cheeks finally getting color back, their breathing finally steady. Nobody put those children in that cellar for them to die in my barn, she said. That's why. She pulled the door open and the cold came in, and she went out into the white. Behind her, the fire burned on, and Nathan Cole sat on the floor of a stranger's house, hurting in more places than his shoulder, watching two orphaned girls sleep in a feed crate, and understood for the first time in a long time that the one person in the world willing to stand beside him was a woman he had met less than an hour ago. He also understood, with the clarity that comes when a man has almost nothing left, that he would not let her regret it. The storm outside was loud enough to swallow everything. It swallowed the sound of his breathing. It swallowed the fire. It swallowed whatever it was that had held him together through the night. In the quiet that was left, Nathan Cole let himself close his eyes. Not to sleep, just to stop. Just for a minute. The girls were breathing. The house was warm. The woman had gone out into the blizzard on his behalf and had not asked him for anything except whether he could hold a rifle. He thought about Thomas. He had been trying not to think about Thomas since yesterday morning, because if he thought about Thomas, he would think about Clara. And if he thought about Clara, he would see it again. The smoke, the yard, the silence that was worse than any sound he'd ever heard. He had been keeping the thought at arm's length with everything he had left. But in the quiet of Evelyn Carter's kitchen, with the two small lives she had just walked back into a blizzard to protect breathing softly in front of him, Nathan let himself think about Thomas for a moment. Thomas had never once called Nathan a bad man. In 8 years, in all the years when Nathan had been doing things that made that a reasonable thing to call him, Thomas had never once said it. He'd said, "You're making a wrong choice." He'd said, "I know who you are underneath this, even if you don't." He'd said in the letter that Nathan had read 4 times on the ride north, "I need a friend, not an outlaw, not a gun, a friend." Nathan had not been in time to be that. But he was here now. He was in this kitchen with Thomas's daughters, and the woman who had just walked out the door was the first stranger since Thomas himself who had looked at him and not at his history. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He wasn't sure he deserved it. He looked down at his hands. They were large hands, scarred across the knuckles, and they had done things in the past 10 years that he would carry until he died. But this morning, those same hands had kept 2 5-month-old girls alive through 30 miles of night and cold and impossible conditions. And he thought maybe that didn't cancel anything out, but maybe it was a start. He heard the door before he heard Evelyn. She came in fast, shedding snow, and the cold air rolled in ahead of her like a curtain. "They're closer than I thought," she said. She was pulling off her gloves, not looking at him. Tracks on the north fence line. 3 horses, maybe 4. They sheltered up during the worst of it, but the snow's letting up now. Nathan was already pushing himself toward upright. His shoulder screamed at the effort, and he let it scream. "How long?" "An hour," she said. "Maybe less." She moved to the corner where she kept her rifle, checked it with the quick efficiency of someone who had handled weapons her whole life, and then went to the cabinet beside the fireplace and began laying things out on the table. A second rifle. A pistol. Ammunition. "The barn is where they'll come first," she said. "They'll want to check for horses before they come to the house. If we're in the barn when they arrive, then we control the angle," he said. She looked up. "Yes." "You've done this before," he said. Not an accusation, more like a question he wasn't sure how to ask. She loaded the pistol with the steady hands of someone who wasn't going to answer that right now. "The babies need to stay in here under the bed," she said, "away from the windows." He nodded. He got up, and the room went sideways on him for a moment, the floor tilting in a way that had nothing to do with the floor, and then steadied. He crossed to the crate and crouched beside it. One of the girls had her eyes open. She was looking at him with the uncertain focus of an infant who didn't know yet what to make of the world. And he put his finger against her hand and she wrapped her fist around it with the automatic grip that babies have, the one that doesn't mean trust yet but feels like it. He thought about Thomas doing this. Thomas, who had laughed louder than anyone Nathan had ever known, and who had argued about everything, and who had chosen a life of early mornings and honest work, and had died for a piece of land with a creek on it, which was all he'd ever wanted. I'm going to get you somewhere safe, Nathan said quietly. Not to the baby exactly. More to the room, more to whatever was listening. I'm going to do that. That's the one thing I'm going to do. He picked them both up, one careful armful at a time, and carried them to the bedroom and set them as far under the bed as he could reach, in the warmth that the fire from the main room threw through the doorway, wrapped in the blankets Evelyn had brought out. They didn't cry. They seemed to understand, in the wordless way of the very young, that quiet was what was needed now. He came back out and took the rifle from the table. Evelyn was watching him from across the room. "Ready?" she said. Outside, the snow had thinned from a blizzard to a bitter, steady fall, and the wind had dropped enough that you could hear past it now. And in that new quiet, from somewhere out past the fence line, came the sound of horses. Nathan checked the rifle, met Evelyn's eyes across the kitchen, and said, "Yeah." They came in from the north, the way Evelyn had said they would. Nathan heard the horses before he saw anything. 4 sets of hooves moving slow and careful through the snow, the animals picking their feet up high, the way horses do when the ground beneath them is uncertain. He was positioned inside the barn in the dark, pressed against the wall beside the door, with the rifle across his body, and his shoulder was burning with a steady, deep heat that he had decided to simply ignore. He had ignored worse. He could ignore this. Evelyn was above him in the hayloft. He couldn't hear her up there, which was the point. She moved like someone who had grown up understanding that silence was its own kind of weapon, and he'd registered that in the few minutes they'd had to position themselves. The way she'd climbed the loft ladder without a single board creaking, the way she'd gone completely still the moment she reached the top. Through the gap in the barn door, he watched the 4 riders come into the yard. They weren't Hale's best men. He could see that immediately, the way you can read riders before you can read their faces. They were spread out wrong, grouped too close together, and they were moving with the particular carelessness of men who believed the blizzard had done their work for them. They expected to find a dead man and 2 dead infants. They were here to confirm, not to fight. That was their first mistake. The lead rider pulled up in the yard and sat looking at the house for a moment. He said something to the man beside him that Nathan couldn't hear. Then he pointed at the barn. Nathan pulled back from the gap and pressed flat against the wall. The barn door opened. 2 of them came in. The first man held a lantern. The second held a rifle loose in one hand, which told Nathan everything he needed to know about how seriously they were taking this. The lantern light swept the interior, the stalls, the hay, the shadows, and Nathan held completely still and breathed through his mouth and waited. "Nothing," the first man said. The second man stepped further into the barn. He was close enough now that Nathan could see his face. Young, younger than he'd expected, with a thick jaw and cold reddened cheeks. The kind of face that might have belonged to a farmer's son if the farmer's son had made a series of bad choices. "Check the back," the young one said. The first man moved deeper into the barn. That left the young one standing 6 feet from Nathan with his back turned and his rifle hanging loose. Nathan stepped out from the wall. He got the rifle barrel up against the back of the young man's neck before the man could move, and he said very quietly, "Don't." The man froze. "Set it down," Nathan said. The rifle dropped into the hay. From somewhere above them, Evelyn's voice came down from the loft, calm and flat as a board. "The one in the back. Stop where you are. I can see you and you cannot see me. Put the lantern on the ground and put your hands up." A pause. A very long pause. Then the sound of the lantern being set down. Nathan had the young man's wrists pinned behind him in 3 seconds. He used the man's own belt, working one-handed in a way that hurt his shoulder so much he saw white at the edges of his vision, but he got it done. He pushed the man down into the hay and pressed his knee against the man's spine and said, "The other 2 men outside, what are their orders?" The man said nothing. "I'm not asking twice," Nathan said. His voice was still quiet. That was the thing about a quiet voice. It carried more weight than a raised one, because a raised voice meant you still had room for emotion. A quiet voice meant you were past it. "Confirm and report," the man said. His voice was muffled against the hay. "Confirm and report, that's all. We're just supposed to check." "Check and report to who?" "Garrett. Lou Garrett. He's running this from town." Evelyn had come down from the loft. She was standing a few feet back with her rifle ready, watching the man in the back of the barn, who had his hands raised and was staring at a spot on the wall, with the concentrated focus of someone trying not to make any decisions. She glanced at Nathan. He nodded at the door. The two outside were the problem. Two inside, controlled. Two outside still mounted, who would hear or see something wrong within the next few minutes and ride back to report it. "Is there a signal?" Nathan said. "Something you're supposed to do when you've confirmed?" The young man hesitated. "Fire once," he said, "into the air." Nathan looked at Evelyn. She was already moving to the door. She went out through a gap in the side of the barn wall that she'd apparently known about, and Nathan hadn't, a loose board that she eased aside without a sound. And he stayed with the two men in the barn and listened. Outside, the wind, the snow, silence. Then the sound of voices, low, the two mounted men talking to each other, and then one of them saying something with a questioning note in it. Then Evelyn's voice, steady as iron. "Morning." Nathan tightened his grip on the rifle. "You're on my property," she said. Her voice carried well in the cold air. "I don't know you. You can state your business or you can leave." A pause. One of the mounted men said something Nathan couldn't make out. "Looking for someone," she repeated. "Well, I've been alone out here since yesterday. Haven't seen a soul. Not in this weather." A beat. "Your men are in my barn uninvited. I'd like them back out." Another pause, then, "Come on out, Ridley." Nathan put his mouth close to the young man's ear. "Go," he said. "Walk to the door. Don't say anything other than yes. You understand me?" The man nodded. Nathan brought him upright and walked him to the barn door and let him push it open. The young man stepped out into the gray morning light. Nathan stayed in the shadows just inside the door, far enough back that the mounted men couldn't see him, close enough to hear everything. "Anything?" the mounted man said. The young one, Ridley, apparently, stood there in the snow for a moment. Nathan could see the back of his neck, could see the way the muscles in his jaw were working. He was making a decision. He was weighing it. "No," Ridley said. "Nothing." The mounted man grunted. "Let's move." They rode out. Nathan let out a long breath that he hadn't entirely been aware he was holding. He heard Evelyn come back around the corner of the barn, heard her pull the loose board back into place, and then she was inside and looking at him with an expression that was not quite relief, more like the recalibration of someone who had expected one outcome and gotten a different one. "Why'd he do that?" she said. Not to Nathan exactly, more to the situation. "I don't know," Nathan said. He looked at Ridley, who was standing in the barn looking at his own boots. "Why did you do that?" The young man didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "Thomas Reed was my neighbor, before he sold to Hale." He paused. "Before he was made to sell." Something shifted in the air of the barn. "How old are you?" Evelyn said. 22, he said. She exchanged a look with Nathan that lasted half a second and communicated more than most conversations. They tied Ridley's companion, a heavy-set man named Wick, who had not said a word since Evelyn had come down from the loft, to a post in the back of the barn with enough slack that he could sit. They left them both water and told them they'd be untied in a few hours when it was safer to do so. Ridley sat down in the hay and didn't fight it. Wick sat down and stared at a fixed point with the expression of a man calculating his options, which meant he'd need watching. Nathan made a note of it. Back inside the house, Nathan went straight to the bedroom and checked the babies. Both asleep, tucked in under the bed, breathing evenly. He stayed crouched there for a moment longer than he needed to, one hand on the floor, just listening to them breathe. Then he got back up and went to the kitchen table and sat down heavily and let himself feel what his shoulder was doing, which was considerable. Evelyn set a cup of coffee in front of him without being asked and sat down across the table. "Garrett," she said. "Lou Garrett," Nathan said. "He's Hale's man in Casper, runs the operation at ground level, keeps the paperwork clean, coordinates the riders, makes sure there are enough degrees of separation between what Hale orders and what can be proven." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "He's not stupid. When those 4 don't report back on schedule, he'll know something went wrong." "How long before he sends more?" Nathan thought about it. "He'll want to assess first. He doesn't know what he's sending them into. He knows I'm armed and that I've been running for a day. He doesn't know about you." He paused. "He'll send more men than last time, and he'll do it right. Not today, maybe, but tomorrow at the outside." Evelyn was quiet from it, turning the coffee cup in her hands. She had a habit of stillness that Nathan had already noticed, The way she went quiet before she spoke, like she was sorting through possibilities and discarding the ones that didn't hold. He'd met very few people in his life who actually did that before opening their mouths. "There's a town," she said, 7 miles south, Millhaven. It's small, but it has a sheriff and a telegraph line to Cheyenne. If we could get the babies there." She stopped. "But Garrett will have men watching the road." "He will," Nathan said. "So the road isn't an option." "Not the main road," he said. "But there's—" He stopped, looked at her. "You said you know this land." "Grew up on it," she said. "Grew up 30 miles from here, married Daniel, moved here 11 years ago. I know every creek and ridge between here and the Powder River." "Is there a way to Millhaven that doesn't use the road?" She thought about it. Not the performance of thinking, actual thought, her eyes going slightly unfocused, her hands still on the cup. "There's a route along the creek line," she said. "Longer. Adds 4 miles, maybe 5. The creek is frozen hard enough to walk, but the banks are rough going, especially with snow cover. Slow." She paused. "But they won't be watching it." "Then that's the route," Nathan said. She nodded slowly. "There's another thing," she said. "Thomas Reed, when you said he wouldn't sell the water right, do you know what Hale actually wants it for?" Nathan looked at her. "Because," she continued, "it matters for what we do when we get to Millhaven. If the sheriff telegraphs Cheyenne, he needs to give them something specific. Not just that Hale ordered a killing. Hale has a dozen lawyers who can cloud that. He needs a reason. He needs the thing underneath." Nathan set down the coffee cup. "How do you know about that?" he said. Not suspiciously, genuinely. "My husband," she said. "Daniel. Before he died, he had a dispute with a man named Pritchard over water access from the creek that runs along the south edge of our property. The dispute went to county court. Pritchard had a lawyer, Daniel had nothing, and the lawyer found a way to make the entire case about something it wasn't about. The judge ruled for Pritchard." She was quiet for a second. "Daniel died 6 months later, and I have always believed, even though I can't prove it, that the two things are connected, that the stress of losing that case was the thing that made him susceptible to what the fever did to him. So yes, I know about the thing underneath." Nathan was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely categorize. It wasn't pity. She would have shut down pity immediately. It was something more like recognition. "Reed's Creek," he said. "Thomas's water right on Reed's Creek. There's a railhead being built through this territory, Cheyenne and Northern. It's coming through the valley, and it needs water access for the locomotives. And the most valuable access point on the entire route is the one Thomas controlled." He paused. "I found out 3 weeks ago, before I even got Thomas's letter, that Hale had quietly bought options on the land on either side of the water, right? He just needed the middle. He needed Thomas out." Evelyn absorbed that. Her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes went hard and focused. "So it's not just a murder," she said. "It's fraud, conspiracy, land theft, and railroad collusion. All of which Hale has documentation for," Nathan said. "Some of which Thomas had documentation for, too. He kept records. That's why Hale burned the house, not just to send a message. He was burning evidence." "But he didn't know about the root cellar." "No," Nathan said. "He didn't." Evelyn stood up. She went to the corner of the kitchen and crouched down beside the flour barrel and moved it aside, and Nathan watched as she lifted a section of the floorboard beneath it and reached in and pulled out a tin box, about the size of a small bread loaf, sealed with a clasp. She set it on the table. "Daniel's records," she said, "from the Pritchard dispute. Every letter, every document, every note from every conversation. He was meticulous." She looked at Nathan across the table. "I've been keeping it because I didn't know what else to do with it. I couldn't prove anything. But if Hale's operation has been running the same playbook here as he ran on Daniel, the same pattern of buying adjacent land, creating legal pressure, using violence when the legal pressure fails, then what's in this box might be the thing that makes Thomas Reed's case credible." Nathan stared at the tin box for a long moment. "Where did Daniel buy the land from?" he said quietly. "A man named Caldwell," she said. "He sold it off in parcels. He was—" She stopped. Something crossed her face. "He was Victor Hale's father-in-law." The word settled between them like a stone dropping into still water. "He's been working this valley for over a decade," Nathan said. "Yes," she said. "I think he has." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the snow had lightened further. Through the window, the landscape was white and flat and deceptively still, the way dangerous things often are between actions. Nathan pulled the tin box toward him and opened the clasp. Inside were papers, letters, survey documents, court filings, notes written in a careful hand on whatever paper had been available, some of it the back of flour sacks. He leafed through carefully with his good arm. "This is Daniel's writing?" he said. "Yes." He was thorough. "He was a careful man," she said. Something in her voice when she said it, not sentimentality, more like the bare statement of something true that still had a small amount of weight. Nathan understood that. Some things never stopped having weight. You just got better at carrying them. He set the papers back in the box and closed the clasp. "We take this with us," he said, "when we go to Millhaven. This plus whatever I know about Hale's operation. It won't be enough to hang him, but it'll be enough to force a federal inquiry. And a federal inquiry is the one thing Hale can't buy his way out of before it starts moving." "Can you do that?" she said. "Give testimony with your history?" The question was direct, and she didn't apologize for asking it. He respected that. "My history is what it is," he said. "I'm not going to pretend it's something else. But I haven't been charged with anything in 4 years, and Thomas Reed had an honest man's reputation from here to Laramie, and those babies are alive when everyone who wanted them dead probably assumed they weren't." He paused. "That matters. It won't wipe the slate. But it matters." She nodded. Not approval exactly, more like the acknowledgement of a reasonable assessment. They spent the next 3 hours preparing. Evelyn moved through the house with the organized efficiency of someone who understood the difference between what was necessary and what was not, and who was capable of setting the second category aside entirely without grieving it. She packed food for the journey, hardtack, dried meat, the rest of the milk for the babies. She pulled out a fur-lined carrier that Nathan suspected had been made for an infant at some point, or perhaps adapted from something else, he didn't ask, and fitted both babies into it so they could be worn close to a body for warmth. She handed it to Nathan. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Your shoulder won't handle a rifle in that," she said, "but it'll handle that, and I'll need both hands free." He couldn't argue with the logic. He put the carrier on over his good shoulder and settled both girls against his chest, and they shifted and murmured and then went still with the warmth of him. His shoulder burned at the strap's pressure. He breathed through it. "The man in the barn," he said. "Ridley." "I know," she said. "We can't leave him tied for days, but we can't take him with us." "I'm not suggesting we take him," Nathan said. "I'm suggesting we talk to him before we go." She looked at him. "He lied for us," Nathan said. "That wasn't because he was scared. He was scared, but he lied for Thomas. For Thomas's memory, maybe. Or just because he's 22 years old and not entirely lost yet." He paused. "I want to know what else he knows." They went back to the barn together, in the gray afternoon light. Wick was asleep against his post, or performing sleep, hard to tell. Ridley was awake, sitting in the hay with his knees pulled up, and he looked up when they came in without surprise, like he'd been expecting them. "What do you know about Lou Garrett?" Nathan said. Ridley looked at him for a moment. "Enough," he said. "Enough to testify?" A silence. Outside the barn, the wind moved. A horse in the stall shifted its feet. "Garrett keeps records," Ridley said. "He's careful about it. He keeps them because he doesn't trust Hale not to turn on him someday. He's got a ledger. I've seen it. It's in the safe in the back room of the land title office in Casper." Nathan felt something sharpen in his chest. "You've seen this ledger." "I've seen him take it out," Ridley said. "I've seen him write in it. I don't know what it says, but I know what it is. He writes in it every time a job gets done. I think he's keeping track of who did what, so that if it ever comes down to it, he can—" He stopped. "So he can protect himself." Evelyn said, "If that ledger exists and we can get to it—" "We can't get to it," Nathan said. "Not before we get the girls safe. But if we can get a federal marshal to move on the land title office before Garrett knows there's heat." He looked at Ridley. "Would you testify to what you've seen? To the ledger's existence?" Ridley looked down at his hands for a long time. Long enough that Nathan thought he was going to say no. That he was going to decide that the weight of it was more than a 22-year-old with limited choices could carry. Then Ridley said, "Thomas Reed used to let me fish his creek in the summers. Didn't charge me anything, didn't ask for anything back, just said—" He stopped, cleared his throat. Just said that the creek was for everyone and always had been. Nathan said nothing. Sometimes nothing was the right thing. Yeah, Ridley said. I'll testify. Evelyn cut him loose. Not Wick. Wick she left with enough slack to get free eventually, but not quickly. Nathan didn't question the judgment. They left the ranch in the late afternoon, when the light was going flat and gray, and the temperature had dropped again to something honest about what Wyoming in winter intended. Evelyn led and Nathan followed, and he carried the girls against his chest and felt their warmth against him, and put one foot in front of the other through the snow. Ridley came with them. It had not been stated explicitly. Nathan had not asked, and Evelyn had not suggested it. But when they'd walked out of the barn, Ridley had simply fallen into step behind them, and neither of them had turned him away. He was on foot and unarmed, and he walked without complaint through snow that came past his boot tops. The creek route was hard going, the way Evelyn had said it would be. The banks were steep in places, the ice uncertain underfoot in others. She went first at every uncertain stretch, testing with her boot before committing her weight, and then reaching back a hand for Nathan, who accepted it without comment, even though accepting it made his jaw tighten, because his shoulder was by now producing a pain that had moved from burning to a kind of deep structural wrongness that suggested he had done it no favors in the past several hours. He didn't say anything about it. What would be the point? An hour into the walk, one of the babies woke up and began to cry. Not the thin, exhausted sound from earlier, but a real cry. Strong, indignant, deeply inconvenient. Nathan stopped and put his back to the wind and tried to settle her, rocking slightly the way he'd seen Clara do, and after a moment she subsided into hiccups and then silence. He stood there in the dark and the cold with both girls against his chest and thought, with a clarity that surprised him, that he would carry them until his legs gave out. He would carry them to Millhaven or he would die on this creek bank, and those were the only two options, and one of them was not acceptable. He started walking again. You're good with them, Evelyn said quietly. She was beside him now, the creek bank having widened. I'm not, he said. I have no idea what I'm doing. That's not what I see. He didn't know what to say to that. He didn't say anything. They reached Millhaven after dark, cold to the bone and moving slowly, and the lights of the town came up through the trees like something Nathan had stopped letting himself expect. He heard Evelyn exhale beside him, not a dramatic sound, just a long breath going out, and understood that she had not been as certain as she'd appeared. The sheriff's office was lit. Nathan could see the shape of a man inside through the window. He stopped at the edge of the tree line and looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. If the sheriff telegraphs Cheyenne tonight, she said, Hale doesn't find out until morning at the earliest. That's our window. And if the sheriff is in Hale's pocket? She considered. Then we're in trouble, she said. But I've met Ira Marsh twice. He struck me as a man who chose this town because he was tired of complicated. Complicated is about to find him anyway, Nathan said. Yes, she said. But finding it rather than being part of it is different. I think he can tell the difference. She went to the door and knocked, and Nathan stood in the dark outside with Thomas Reed's daughters pressed against his chest, feeling the cold in his bones and the fire in his shoulder, and waited to see which way the next thing would fall. The door opened. Light spilled out onto the snow. Inside, Nathan could see a man looking out at Evelyn with the expression of someone whose quiet evening had just become something else entirely. Not angry, not afraid, just waiting to understand what was being asked of him. Evelyn said, Sheriff Marsh, I need about 10 minutes of your time and a telegraph to Cheyenne, and I need you to look at what I'm about to show you and tell me what a man with a badge is supposed to do about it. A pause. The sheriff said, Come in out of the cold. Nathan followed Evelyn through the door, and Ridley followed Nathan, and the sheriff looked at all three of them and then at the two small faces visible at Nathan's chest, and whatever he'd been about to say he kept to himself. He closed the door against the cold. The tin box went on the table, the papers went out, and Nathan Cole, former outlaw, sat down in a chair in a sheriff's office in a town he'd never been to before and started telling the truth about everything he knew, which was the only thing left that he could do, and which turned out, after all of it, to be enough to fill a room. Sheriff Ira Marsh was not a man who showed much on his face. He had the particular blankness of someone who had spent enough years listening to people in crisis that he had learned to receive information without reacting to it, because reacting to it before you understood it was how you made things worse. He listened to Nathan for 20 minutes without interrupting. He looked at the papers from the tin box. He looked at Ridley, who sat in the corner with his hat in his hands and confirmed the parts he could confirm. Then he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a moment. "Garrett's ledger," he said finally. "You're certain it exists?" "I saw him with it more than a dozen times," Ridley said. "He'd take it out, write something in it, put it back in the safe. Same routine after every job. Every time." Marsh looked at Nathan. "And you can give testimony about Hale's broader operation. The pattern of acquisition. The names of others who were pressured out." "I can name 6 families," Nathan said. 4 of them left the territory. 2 stayed and signed over under duress. I know the approximate timeline of each. I know who Garrett used to execute the pressure, and in some cases I know what was paid." He paused. "I can't prove all of it from memory alone, but I can give investigators enough to know where to look." "And the woman," Marsh looked at Evelyn. "Evelyn Carter," she said. "My husband documented the Pritchard land transfer 9 years ago. Caldwell, who sold us our land, was Hale's father-in-law. The pattern goes back at least that far, probably further." Marsh picked up one of Daniel's pages and held it closer to the lamp. He read it for a moment. He set it down. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said. "Victor Hale has money, and he has lawyers, and he has men. What you've brought me tonight is the beginning of a case, not the end of one. A federal marshal is going to need more than this to move against him." "We know that," Evelyn said. "What I can do tonight," Marsh continued, "is send a telegram to the marshal's office in Cheyenne. I know the man there, Tom Aldridge. He's square. He'll take this seriously and he'll move carefully, which is what you want. You don't want someone moving fast and giving Hale's lawyers a procedural reason to shut it down before it opens." He looked between them. "But you need to understand that between tonight and whenever federal authority arrives here, you are exposed. Hale will know something went wrong when his men don't report. He'll know roughly where to look." "How long for Aldridge to respond?" Nathan said. "Telegram tonight, response by morning. If I include the specifics you've given me, the ledger, the railroad connection, the names, he'll understand the urgency." Marsh stood up. "But the babies need to stay somewhere safe while this develops. Not here. My office has 1 room and a door, and if Hale decides to move hard on Millhaven, it won't hold." Nathan said, "Where then?" Marsh was already moving to the door that connected to the back of the building. "There's a woman here in town," he said. "Margaret Hoyle. She's a midwife. Delivered half the children in this county. She has a house 3 streets back with a root cellar that has a lock on it from the inside, and she is not the kind of woman who tells people what's in her house." He paused with his hand on the door. "She also has very strong feelings about children being put in danger, and if I explain the situation to her, she will want to help in a way that will be useful." "You trust her," Evelyn said. "I've known her for 11 years, Marsh said. "She's the most stubborn person in this county, and right now that's what we need." He left to send the telegram himself. Evelyn sat with the babies while Nathan and Ridley waited, and nobody talked much. The fire in the small stove at the back of the room was loud in the silence. At some point, one of the girls woke, and Evelyn fed her from the bottle she'd warmed on the stove, and the baby drank with the focused seriousness of an infant who had learned that food was not something to take lightly, and Nathan watched from across the room and felt something in his chest that he did not try to name. Marsh came back 40 minutes later. "Done," he said. "I also spoke to Margaret. She'll take the children tonight." He walked them to Margaret Hoyle's house himself, through the dark streets of Millhaven, in a cold that had gone crystalline and still. Margaret Hoyle opened the door before they knocked. She'd been watching from the window, and she was a small, broad-shouldered woman of about 60, with gray hair pinned back and eyes that took in everything and showed nothing she didn't choose to show. She looked at the babies and Nathan's carrier for a long moment. "Come in," she said. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She looked at the girls, assessed their condition with the brisk competence of someone who had spent decades in the business of new life and everything that went wrong around it, and declared them underweight but healthy, which was more than Nathan had dared to think definitively. She produced warm milk and clean cloth and set to work as if she had been expecting them all winter. Nathan stood in her small parlor and watched her and felt, for the first time in 2 days, something in him unknot very slightly. Not relief. It was too early for relief. But the specific tension of a man who has been the only thing standing between two infants and the world gave way, just slightly, to the knowledge that there was now someone else standing there too. He reached into the carrier and lifted the nearest girl out, and held her for a moment before handing her to Margaret. The baby grabbed at the front of his coat with both fists, the way she'd been doing since he'd found her, and then let go. "I'll be back for them," he said. Not to Margaret exactly. To the baby, maybe. To himself. Margaret looked at him over the infant's head with the expression of a woman who had heard a great many promises and knew exactly which ones to believe. She said, "See that you are," and turned away to the task. Evelyn put a hand briefly on Nathan's arm as they walked back out into the cold. She took it away before it became a thing he needed to respond to. He understood it was just acknowledgement, that she had seen the moment and recognized what it cost, and he was grateful she'd left it at that. Back at the sheriff's office, the four of them went over what came next. Marsh had sent his deputy, a young man named Cal, who clearly had not been told much and was displaying the alertness of someone who understood that not being told much was itself informative, to watch the road north of town. The telegram was sent. The children were safe. The tin box was locked in Marsh's own cabinet. What remained was Garrett's ledger. "We can't get to it," Nathan said. "Not before Aldridge responds." "But Garrett doesn't know that yet," Evelyn said. Nathan looked at her. "He knows something went wrong," she continued. "He knows his men didn't report, but he doesn't know what we have. He doesn't know about the tin box or about Ridley's testimony or about the telegraph. All he knows is that 4 men went to my ranch and didn't come back on schedule." She paused. "If he thinks we're still running, still trying to get out of the territory, then his attention stays on the roads, on finding us. He won't be thinking about the land title office. Until someone tips him," Nathan said. "Yes," she said, "which is why we can't stay in Mill Haven." Marsh said, "You're suggesting you leave." "I'm suggesting we make it look like we're still running," she said. "If Garrett sends men to Mill Haven looking for us and we're not here, he'll assume we passed through. He'll push the search south, toward Casper. That keeps his focus away from the office and away from the ledger until Aldridge can move." Nathan had been watching her lay this out. He thought about objecting to the part where she was proposing that the two of them go back out into the Wyoming winter with Hale's men actively searching, and then he thought about whether the objection would hold up to scrutiny, and concluded that it wouldn't. "The Carter Ranch," he said. She looked at him. "We go back," he said. "It's the last place Garrett would look for us after he's already searched it. We have supplies there. We know the terrain, and if Aldridge moves fast—" "He might move very fast," Marsh said quietly. "The railroad connection changes the calculus. Federal jurisdiction over railroad interference is absolute. If Aldridge sees what I sent him, he won't wait." "How long does fast mean?" Nathan said. 24 hours, Marsh said. "Maybe 36, if things go right." 36 hours. Nathan thought about his shoulder. He thought about the creek route in the dark. He thought about Evelyn, who had been moving without sleep for the better part of 2 days without complaint, and who was now sitting straight in her chair like the thought of being tired had not occurred to her. "All right," he said. "We go back." Ridley from the corner said, "I'm coming." They both looked at him. "I know Garrett's schedule," he said. "I know how he runs his men. If you're going back to the ranch and you're trying to stay ahead of where he looks next, I can help with that. I know how he thinks." He looked at Nathan directly. "And I owe Thomas Reed something I can't pay back, but I can do this." Nobody argued with him. They left Mill Haven 2 hours before dawn, the same way they'd come in, through the trees along the creek line, and the cold was worse going back than it had been coming in, the temperature having dropped another 10 degrees while they'd been inside. Nathan felt it in his shoulder before he felt it anywhere else, a deep stiffening that made the joint feel packed with gravel. He kept moving. There was nothing else to do. Evelyn led. Ridley followed. Nathan came last, which was where he wanted to be, watching the tree line on both sides of the creek for movement. There wasn't any. The night was clear now, the storm entirely past, and the stars were the kind of brilliant that only happens in cold weather, hard and close overhead. In different circumstances, it might have been beautiful. They reached the ranch in the gray hour before dawn. The barn was quiet. Wick was gone, which they'd expected. He would have worked himself loose by midnight and ridden south to report, which meant Garrett already knew something had happened at the ranch, just not what. Inside the house, Evelyn built the fire back up without being asked, moving quickly, and Nathan sat at the table and let himself assess honestly for the first time what his body was actually doing. His shoulder was not good. The walk, had opened the wound, he suspected, though the bandaging was holding the bleeding to something manageable. His hands were functional. His legs were functional. He was running on the kind of reserve that a man only finds when he doesn't have a choice, which was a reserve he'd used before and which he knew was finite. Ridley sat across from him and looked at the table. "You should sleep," Evelyn said to Nathan. "One of us needs to watch," he said. "I'll watch," she said. 2 hours. Then Ridley. He didn't argue. He went to the chair by the fire, the one she'd been sitting in when he'd woken up the morning before, and he put his head back and was asleep in minutes. He dreamed about Thomas, which he'd been expecting. In the dream, Thomas was standing in the yard at Broken Creek in summer, not winter, and the creek was running and everything was green, and Thomas was laughing at something Nathan had said, and Nathan couldn't remember in the dream what he'd said, but it didn't matter. Thomas was alive and the creek was running, and both of those things were true at the same time, and Nathan stood in the yard and let himself be in a place where that was still possible. He woke to Evelyn's hand on his arm. Not the brief contact from before, firm, deliberate. "Riders," she said quietly. "On the road. 3 of them." He was on his feet before he was fully awake, the shoulder screaming at the abrupt movement, and he crossed to the window and looked out through the gap in the curtain. 3 riders on the road, moving slow, not fast, which meant they were looking, not chasing. Garrett's men, 2 of them he didn't recognize and 1 he did. Lou Garrett himself. That was not what he'd expected. Garrett was not a man who came himself. Garrett sent men and stayed behind the desk and kept his hands clean. The fact that he was here, riding his own horse in the early morning cold, meant one of 2 things. Either he was more certain of what he'd find than Nathan had hoped, or he was more frightened of what he'd lost than Nathan had counted on. "He's not sure," Nathan said quietly, almost to himself. Evelyn was beside him at the window. "How do you know?" "He's moving slow," Nathan said. "If he knew we were here, he'd move fast and cover the exits. He's slow because he doesn't know. He's checking." Ridley, from the other side of the window, said, "He's scared." Both of them looked at him. "Garrett doesn't come himself unless he's scared," Ridley said. "He's been doing this for years behind other people. When he comes himself, it means he thinks the situation has gotten to the point where he can't trust anyone else to handle it right." He paused. "Which means he knows something went wrong that he can't explain." "The telegraph," Evelyn said. "Maybe," Nathan said. "Or Wick told him something that didn't add up. Something about the barn. About us being gone. The baby's gone. The supplies gone. He knows we didn't just run. He knows we went somewhere specific." The 3 riders had stopped in the road. Garrett was looking at the house. Nathan watched him from behind the curtain. A heavy-set man in a good coat, maybe 50, with the kind of face that had once been somebody's idea of respectable and had simply held on to the shape while the interior changed. I was looking at the house with the careful attention of a man adding up a sum. Then he looked at the barn. "He's going to check the barn," Nathan said. Evelyn said, "Let him." Nathan turned to look at her. "There's nothing in the barn," she said. "Wick is gone. The horses are gone. He'll find nothing. And a man who finds nothing where he expected to find something will either leave or push further." She met Nathan's eyes. "Either way, we learned something about what he knows." They waited. Garrett sent one of his men to check the barn. The man dismounted, went inside, came out after a few minutes, and shook his head. Garrett sat on his horse and stared at the house for a long moment. Nathan watched the stillness in Garrett's posture. The way he wasn't moving, wasn't fidgeting, was just thinking. He was a careful man. Careful men were dangerous in a particular way because they didn't make the errors that impatient men made. Then Garrett said something to his 2 men, turned his horse, and rode back the way he'd come. Ridley let out a breath. "He'll be back," Nathan said, "but not today. Today he goes back to Casper and reassesses." He turned from the window. "That's our window." "Aldridge needs to move today," Evelyn said. "Or tonight," Nathan said. "The ledger has to come out of that office before Garrett decides to move it or burn it." He looked at Ridley. "The land title office in Casper. You said Garrett keeps the ledger in the safe in the back room." "Yes," Ridley said. "Who else works in that office?" 2 clerks, Ridley said. "In the daytime." At night, nobody. Garrett sometimes works late, but he wasn't planning to be in Casper today. He came out here. He thought about it. The clerks leave at 5. Then the window is tonight, Nathan said. Evelyn said, "We can't get to Casper by tonight. Not on foot in this terrain." "No," Nathan agreed. "But Marsh can, or Aldridge if he moves on the telegram." He turned toward the door. "I need to get a message back to Millhaven." "I'll go," Ridley said. Both Nathan and Evelyn looked at him. "I know the way," he said. "I can move faster than either of you right now. No offense. And I know Casper. I know the office. I know the back entrance to the building." He looked at Nathan directly. "If Aldridge needs someone to walk him through the layout, that's me." Nathan thought about it. He thought about the 22-year-old sitting in front of him who had lied to his employers that morning to protect 2 babies he'd never met, who had walked 5 miles through the snow in the dark without complaint, who had said Thomas Reed used to let me fish his creek and had meant it with everything he had. "You understand what you're stepping into," Nathan said. "This isn't one action. Once you go to that marshal and walk him through that building, you are in this until it's over. Garrett will know it was you." "I know," Ridley said, "and you're choosing that." "I'm choosing that," he said. Nathan nodded. "Then go." Ridley went. He was out the door and into the white morning in less than 2 minutes, moving fast along the tree line the way Evelyn had shown them, and then gone. The house was quiet. The fire was loud. Nathan stood in the middle of the kitchen and realized he was swaying slightly, which was new, and sat down at the table before the decision was made for him. Evelyn set a plate in front of him without comment. He ate without tasting it, because eating was something his body needed, and he understood that. "Nathan," she said. He looked up. She was sitting across from him with her hands flat on the table. She had the look of someone who had been deciding whether to say something and had arrived at yes. "When this is over," she said, "what do you do?" He held the question for a moment. "I don't know," he said. "I've been thinking about Thomas's girls. Whether there's family somewhere, whether someone will take them." He paused. "If there isn't—" He stopped. Evelyn waited. "I don't know what that looks like," he said. "A man with my history trying to raise 2 children. I don't know if that's—" He shook his head. "I'm not sure I know what I can offer them." "You've been offering them your life for 2 days," she said. "That seems like a start." He looked at her. She was not saying it to make him feel better. She was saying it because it was accurate, which was entirely different. "What about you?" he said. She looked down at the table. "I've been alone here a long time," she said. "I got good at it. But I think I got confused somewhere along the way and started thinking that getting good at something was the same as wanting it." She paused. "I don't want it. I just got good at it." Neither of them said anything else for a while. The fire shifted and settled. Outside, the morning was moving. Somewhere south of them, Ridley was running toward Millhaven. Somewhere in Cheyenne, Tom Aldridge was reading a telegram about a ledger in a safe and a railroad that ran through dead men's water rights. Somewhere in Casper, Lou Garrett was riding back to a desk he had sat behind for years, confident in the machinery he ran, not yet aware that the machinery had a crack in it that had started in a root cellar on Broken Creek and run all the way to a sheriff's office in a small town where a woman with a tin box had put everything on the table and asked a man with a badge what he was supposed to do about it. And somewhere in Margaret Hoyle's house in Millhaven, 2 girls who did not yet understand what they had survived were sleeping in the warm, breathing evenly, waiting for a world to sort itself out enough to hold them properly. Nathan went to the window and looked out at the white land. Nothing moved. The road was empty. The sky was pale and cold and enormous above the flats. He thought about what Evelyn had said, getting good at something and wanting it being different things. He thought about how long he had been moving, not just the last 2 days, but the last 4 years, and whether any of the moving had been toward something or whether all of it had just been away. Then, from somewhere outside, faintly, from the direction of the south road, hoofbeats. Not 3 horses this time, more, moving fast. He turned from the window. Evelyn. She was already at the other window. Her rifle was in her hand. She looked out and he watched her face and read it, the way he had learned to read it in 2 days in a way that felt like longer. 6, she said. At least 6. Garrett changed his mind, Nathan said. Or he had orders already sent before he came out here himself, she said, and they arrived. Nathan went for his rifle. His shoulder informed him of its opinion on the matter, and he informed it back that the opinion was noted and irrelevant. He came to stand beside her at the window, and they looked out together at the riders coming down the road toward the ranch, and the distance between those riders and this window was closing faster than was comfortable. "There's a root cellar," Evelyn said. Her voice was level. "Behind the barn. You can access it from the interior of the barn through a hatch in the back wall. It's dug into the hillside. Thick walls, one entry. If we need a place to hold, we're not going underground," Nathan said. She looked at him. "We go underground, we lose everything," he said. "We need them to not be certain we're here, same as before." He thought fast, moving through it. "If we're in the barn and they're uncertain, if they don't know whether this is an ambush or an empty property, then they're careful," she said, "and careful men take longer." "And longer is what we need," he said. "Ridley has been walking for 3 hours. If Aldridge moved on the telegram this morning, he could have men inside Casper by tonight. We need to buy hours, just hours." Evelyn looked at the riders. She looked at Nathan. She looked at the rifle in her hands. "The barn," she said. "The barn," he said. They went out the back of the house at a run, crossing the open yard between the house and the barn in the white morning, and Nathan ran with his shoulder wrapped in fire and his mind running faster than his legs, counting the distance and the time and the options, and Evelyn ran beside him without a word because there was nothing to say that the running wasn't already saying. The barn doors closed behind them. Evelyn went up the loft ladder. Nathan pressed himself against the wall beside the main door and listened to the hoofbeats getting louder on the road outside. 6 men. Victor Hale's men. Coming for 2 people who had nothing left to give except the hours it would take to reach them. He tightened his grip on the rifle and waited, and the cold settled in around him like it intended to stay. The 6 riders pulled up at the edge of the yard and sat their horses in the white morning and did not immediately move toward anything, which was the most dangerous thing they could have done. Nathan watched them through the gap between the barn doors. They were spread out, not grouped the way the first 4 had been, not careless. Someone had briefed them properly. They had the deliberate spacing of men who understood that a closed building with unclear occupants was a problem that required patience before it required force. The man at the center of the line was not Garrett. Garrett had gone back to reassess, which meant he'd sent someone he trusted to finish what the first group hadn't. The center man was tall in the saddle, older than the others, wearing a coat that had seen real weather. He sat completely still and looked at the barn with the specific attention of someone doing arithmetic. Nathan recognized him. Cray. Frank Cray. He'd heard the name in Doyle's outfit years ago. Cray had run jobs for 3 different operations across the territory, always as the man sent when the first men failed. He was not impulsive. He did not do anything before he'd thought it through. That made him considerably more dangerous than the riders Nathan had already dealt with. From the loft above, Evelyn was silent. Completely silent. Nathan had stopped being surprised by that. Cray raised his voice toward the barn. "I know there's someone in there. I can see the fresh prints in the yard. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to offer you one chance to walk out before this gets costly." Nathan said nothing. Cray waited a reasonable amount of time. Then he said, "All right." He nodded to the men on his left. 2 of them dismounted and moved toward the barn from the side. Not from the front, which Nathan had anticipated, but from the side where the loose board was, which meant Cray had been briefed about the loose board. Wick. Wick had told Garrett about the side entrance, and Garrett had told Cray. Nathan moved before they reached it. He crossed the barn floor in the dark, reached the loose board in 4 steps, and pressed his back against the wall directly beside it, out of the line of sight. The board came loose a moment later, eased out carefully, slowly, which was worse than if they'd ripped it open. A head appeared in the gap. Nathan drove the rifle stock into it before the man's eyes had adjusted to the dark. The man dropped. His companion outside grabbed for him, and Nathan was already at the gap, blocking it, pressing himself into the opening with the rifle pointed outward through the gap. "Back up," he said. The second man scrambled back. Nathan watched him through the gap. Hands going up, mouth working silently. From outside, Cray's voice, "You just used your one warning shot." "I didn't fire," Nathan said, loudly enough to carry. "Your man is breathing. He's just down. Whether that changes is your decision." A pause. Cray said something to his remaining men that Nathan couldn't make out. Then, Cole. Nathan Cole. I know you're in there. I was told to bring you in, but I wasn't told in what condition. You want to think about that? I have thought about it, Nathan said. Then you know how this ends. I know how yesterday ends, Nathan said. I'm less sure about today. He kept his voice even. He was counting in his head. Not seconds, situations. How long until Cray decided patience had run its course? What angle the men still mounted could use to cover the main doors? Whether the man he'd put down was starting to come around. Garrett sent you, he said. Garrett is in Casper. No response from Cray. Casper is an interesting place to be this morning, Nathan said, particularly around the land title office. The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than the one before it. Cray said, What did you do? Nothing myself, Nathan said. I've been here all morning. You can see my tracks. He paused. The question is what other people have been doing while you were riding out here. He could hear Cray thinking. He could hear it in the particular quality of the stillness outside, the held quality, the way things go quiet when someone is reassessing from the ground up. Cray was a professional. He had been sent to accomplish a specific task, and Nathan had just introduced the possibility that while the task was being accomplished out here, something else entirely was being accomplished somewhere else, and that the real value of the morning was not in the barn, but at a desk in Casper. You're bluffing, Cray said, but he said it a half-second too late. Maybe, Nathan said. Do you want to find out by staying here? Another pause. Nathan watched through the gap as one of the mounted men turned his horse slightly, the way a man does when his commitment to his position is wavering. Then, from above, from Evelyn in the loft, a single shot, not at any of them, into the air, through the roof. The sound of it was enormous in the enclosed space, and two of the horses shied hard, and one of the remaining mounted men had to fight his animal for 10 full seconds. In that 10 seconds, Evelyn was already calling down from the loft, her voice carrying clean through the chaos. I can see all of you from up here. I have reloaded. The next one is not into the air. Cray got his horse under control. He looked up at the barn roof. He looked at the gap where Nathan was. He looked at his men. Two mounted, one managing a difficult horse, one standing with his hands up, one on the ground inside the barn. He made the calculation. We're not done, he said. No, Nathan agreed. We're not. Cray pulled his horse around. He said something short to his men and they followed him, pulling back toward the road, not riding hard, not fleeing, just withdrawing with the deliberateness of men who have decided to change the terms rather than lose on the current ones. The man on the ground. Nathan let crawl back out through the gap. He went with the others. They rode south, not toward Casper, south toward the lower road, which meant regrouping rather than reporting. Cray was not done. He was repositioning. Nathan let out a breath and turned into the dark of the barn. His shoulder was something he was genuinely worried about now, and he had been trying not to let himself be, because worry about the body was a luxury, and he hadn't reached the luxury part yet. He pressed his hand against the bandaging through his coat and felt the warmth of new bleeding. Evelyn came down the loft ladder fast. She looked at his shoulder first, not his face, and said, How bad? Moving, he said, not stopping. She said something under her breath that was not a word he'd usually associate with her, and crossed to the supply shelf along the back wall and came back with strips of clean cloth that she'd apparently had the foresight to put out there, and she said, Give me the coat. We don't have time. You'll bleed out and then we'll have even less time, she said. Coat. He gave her the coat. She worked fast and without wasted motion, adding pressure directly, and the pain of it made the barn go briefly white at the edges, but he kept his feet and kept his mouth shut. She tied it off with a firmness that left no room for opinion. Cray knows about the telegraph, he said, when he could talk clearly again. Not the telegraph, she said, handing him back his coat. He knows something happened in Casper. He'll go back to Garrett. Which means Garrett will go to the office, Nathan said. If he gets there before Aldridge, then the ledger disappears, she said. They stood in the cold barn looking at each other. The fire in the house was still going. They could smell it from here, the wood smoke carrying in the still air. And beyond the barn walls, Wyoming sat flat and white and enormous in every direction. And somewhere in all that distance was a man named Ridley walking toward a town. and somewhere further was a man named Aldridge reading a telegram. And between all of those moving pieces was a window that was either open or closing, and they couldn't see which. "We need to know," Nathan said. Evelyn nodded. "Millhaven? If Marsh has heard back from Aldridge, then we know whether the window is open," she said. "And if it's not—" She stopped. Then, "If it's not, then we go to Casper ourselves. On horseback with my shoulder, with Cray repositioning between here and there." "Yes," she said. It was not a plan she was pleased with. It was a plan that existed because the alternatives were worse, and she knew the difference. They saddled 2 horses from the back stall. Evelyn moved fast, efficient, no wasted motion, and went out the back of the barn through the pasture gate and into the tree line before Cray could have had time to position anyone along the south side. Nathan mounted with considerable difficulty and precisely 0 complaint, and they rode through the trees parallel to the creek and did not speak because speaking required attention that both of them were giving to the ground in front of them and the tree line around them. An hour into the ride, they heard a horse behind them. Nathan pulled up and turned in the saddle. Evelyn had her rifle out before he finished the motion. They sat still in the trees and waited. The horse that came through the trees was riderless. It was one of Cray's animals. Nathan recognized the saddle markings, a specific style of brasswork on the fender. The horse was moving at a slow trot, reins loose, unhurried. Nathan and Evelyn exchanged a look. A riderless horse meant a rider who had left it deliberately or a rider who had been made to leave it. Neither of those interpretations was simple. "Keep moving," Nathan said. They kept moving. They reached Millhaven in the early afternoon, coming in from the east along the creek where it flattened out near the edge of town. The main street was quiet, in the way small towns are quiet in winter. Not empty, but reduced, people moving between buildings with the efficiency of people who have no interest in being outside longer than necessary. Marsh's office was lit. As they tied the horses at the rail, the door opened and Marsh stepped out onto the low porch, and Nathan could see from 40 feet away that something had happened. The set of Marsh's shoulders, the way he was moving with more energy than a man who is waiting usually has. "Aldridge responded," Marsh said, before they'd reached him. Evelyn said, "And?" "And he moved," Marsh said. He had 3 deputies in Casper already. They were there on a different matter that turned out to be related to Hale's railroad operation. When my telegram came in, he redirected them to the land title office. He paused, looking between them. "They have the ledger." The word landed in Nathan's chest like something coming loose that had been held too tight for too long. "When?" he said. 2 hours ago," Marsh said. "Your man Ridley. He got here 4 hours back and I sent him straight to the telegraph office, and he dictated everything he knew about the layout, the safe, the combination he'd seen Garrett use. Aldridge's men were in that office before Garrett had any idea they were coming." "Where's Garrett now?" Evelyn said. "In custody in Casper," Marsh said. "He came back to the office and walked straight into Aldridge's men. He's—" Marsh paused, looking for the right word. "He's not comfortable." Nathan sat down on the edge of the porch, not because he decided to, more because his legs made the decision independently, and he recognized it as probably reasonable. He sat on the porch boards in the cold and looked at the street and breathed. Evelyn sat down beside him. Not close, a foot of space between them, but beside him. "It's not done," Marsh said. He was watching them both with the calm of a man who understood that good news was never all the news. Hale himself is still at his compound south of Casper. He hasn't been touched yet. Aldridge has the ledger, but he hasn't had time to read it fully. And until he establishes which crimes are provable versus which are just suggested, he can't move on Hale directly. "How long?" Nathan said. "He's asking for you," Marsh said. "He wants your testimony combined with the ledger. He thinks with both he can go to a federal judge by end of week." He looked at Nathan steadily. "But he needs you in Casper." Casper, Garrett in custody. The ledger in federal hands. And Victor Hale still at his compound with no reason yet to believe the machinery had broken under him. "Cray," Nathan said. "Frank Cray. He's still out." "I know about Cray," Marsh said. "Aldridge knows too. He has men watching the roads." "Cray repositioned south of my ranch this morning," Evelyn said. "He was not coming to report when he left. He was regrouping." Marsh took that in. "I'll get word to Aldridge." "There was a riderless horse in the trees east of here," Nathan said. "About 3 miles back. One of Cray's animals." Marsh looked at him sharply. You didn't see the writer? No. Marsh turned and called back into the office, and the deputy, Cal, the young one, appeared in the doorway. Marsh spoke to him quickly, and Cal nodded and went for his coat and hat with the focused efficiency of someone who is glad to have something specific to do. Inside the office, they found Ridley asleep in the chair in the corner. He'd been there since he'd given his account to Marsh, and apparently hadn't moved. He was sleeping the way young people sleep when their bodies have taken more than they can argue with. Completely, absolutely, like the concept of waking was something he'd consider later. Evelyn looked at him and then at Nathan. He walked 8 miles in the dark in deep snow, she said. I know, Nathan said. She didn't say anything else. She went to the stove and put water on for coffee with the straightforward movements of someone who handles what's in front of them before thinking about what's next. Nathan went to the other chair, the one at the desk, and sat down properly and allowed himself, for the first time since the barn 2 days ago, to think about what the next 48 hours would require. Not as abstract movement, as specific events. Casper, Aldridge, testimony. The federal judge who would sign or not sign an order against one of the most powerful men in Wyoming territory. The lawyers Hale would have in the room by morning. The specific documented case that would need to hold up against whatever those lawyers brought. He thought about the ledger. He thought about what Ridley had said, that Garrett kept it as insurance, that he wrote in it every time a job was done, that it was the record of a man who didn't trust his employer but who kept serving him anyway, writing it all down against the possibility that he would need it someday. In the end, Garrett's self-interest had done what justice hadn't managed on its own. Nathan wasn't sure what to do with the irony of that. He left it alone. Marsh came back inside and spread a map on the desk. A survey map of the territory around Casper, detailed, with roads and topography marked. The route to Casper, he said. Aldridge has a man who can meet you here. He pointed to a junction about 12 miles south, and escort you the rest of the way. He'll have papers. If Cray or anyone else tries to intercept, the federal authority stops it cold. When do we need to leave? Evelyn said. Marsh looked up. We, he said. It wasn't a question exactly. My testimony, she said. Daniel's records. The pattern going back 9 years. She met Marsh's eyes steadily. Aldridge needs that too. Marsh considered. You're right, he said. He does. He looked at the map. Tomorrow morning, early. If Aldridge's man reaches the junction by midday, you can be in Casper by nightfall. He glanced at Nathan's shoulder. Can you ride that? I'll ride it, Nathan said. Marsh looked at him with the expression of a doctor who knows better than to argue with a patient who has decided. I'll send ahead, he said. Aldridge will have someone who can look at that shoulder when you arrive. Nathan thought about the girls. The babies, he said. Margaret. Safe, Marsh said. Margaret Hoyle is not a woman whose house gets searched without a considerable amount of pushback. But yes, as soon as Hale is in custody, the situation for them changes entirely. I want to see them before we leave, Nathan said. Marsh nodded. Margaret will expect you for supper anyway, he said. She's been expecting everyone. They ate at Margaret Hoyle's table that evening. All of them, even Ridley, who had woken up at some point in the afternoon and had appeared at the sheriff's office door with the careful alertness of someone rebuilding their bearings from scratch. Margaret had made a stew that was better than anything any of them had eaten in what felt like weeks, and she served it without ceremony and without conversation about what was happening, which Nathan found more restorative than he would have expected. The babies were in the back room. Margaret had set up a proper arrangement for them, a real crib she'd produced from somewhere, blankets that were clean and warm, a feeding schedule that she described with the confidence of someone who had been in charge of things that mattered for a long time. Both girls were awake when Nathan went in to see them, and the nearest one, the one who had grabbed his coat from the beginning, recognized him in some way that infants recognize things, not visually but through some other sense, and reached toward him. He picked her up. He sat in the chair in the corner of Margaret's back room and held her, and she looked at his face with the serious consideration that babies give to things they're still working out, and he looked back at her and thought about Thomas. Not the way he'd been trying not to think about Thomas, not keeping it at arm's length. He let himself think about Thomas directly, the way you look at something painful, because looking away is worse. Thomas had made one request of him. The letter had said, I need a friend. He hadn't been in time to be that. But he was here now, in a chair in a warm room, holding Thomas's daughter, and by tomorrow evening he would be in an office in Casper telling a federal marshal everything he knew, which was considerable, about the man who had given the nod. That wasn't the same as being in time, but it was what there was. Evelyn appeared in the doorway. She looked at him in the chair with the baby and said nothing for a moment. "She needs a name," Evelyn said. Nathan looked up. "Both of them do," she said. "They have names, presumably. Thomas and Clara would have named them. But we don't know what they are." She paused. "We should find out. Someone knew them. A neighbor, a midwife, someone at a church registry. When this is done," Nathan said. "When this is done," she agreed. She came and sat in the other chair, the one against the wall, and the other baby was in her arms. Margaret had handed it to her on the way in, apparently without asking, and they sat in the warm back room of Margaret Hoyle's house, while outside the night came on cold and clear, and the stars did their indifferent, brilliant thing above Wyoming. "Are you afraid?" Evelyn said. He thought about it honestly. "Of Cray, yes," he said. "Of the ride tomorrow, no. Of the testimony," he paused. "Of standing in a room and being Nathan Cole in front of a federal marshal and a judge and saying, 'Here is everything I know about what I've done and what I've seen.' Yeah, I'm afraid of that." She nodded. "I think that's reasonable." "Are you?" he said. "Of the testimony, no," she said. "I've been waiting to give that testimony for 9 years. I could give it in my sleep." She looked down at the baby in her arms. "I'm afraid of what comes after, what it looks like when everything settles." She paused. "I've been afraid of what comes after for a long time. I'm better at the during." "I'm better at the during too," he said. They sat with that. Morning came too fast, the way mornings do when you have not slept enough, and there is something significant on the other side of the night. Nathan was up before first light, and Evelyn was already at the table in the main room with coffee and the map Marsh had given them. Ridley was there too, to no one's particular surprise. "You're not coming to Casper," Nathan told him. It wasn't a question. "No," Ridley said. "Aldridge has my statement already, and I don't—" He stopped. He looked at the table. "I don't know what's on the other side of this for me. Whether Garrett's men come after me, or whether the federal thing covers me, or—" He shook his head. "I need to think about that somewhere that isn't moving." "Marsh can help you with that," Nathan said. "I know." A pause. "I'm going to stay here a few days. Think." Nathan put his hand on the young man's shoulder, the good one, not the one currently communicating its suffering in vivid terms, and said, "Thomas would say you did right." Ridley looked at the table. His jaw worked. He didn't say anything. Nathan let it rest there. Some things don't need a response. They left at first light, Nathan and Evelyn, on 2 horses from Marsh's own stable, with food packed and Marsh's escort papers in Evelyn's coat pocket. The cold was extreme, the kind of cold that is past unpleasant and into something you simply accept as the condition of existence. But the sky was clear and the road south was visible, and the horses moved well. At the junction, 12 miles south, a man was waiting for them. Federal badge. 2 deputies behind him. He shook their hands with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been fully briefed and didn't need the extended version. "Aldridge is ready for you," he said. "We ride easy, and we get there by dark." They rode. The land opened up around them, the flats giving way to low hills that the road wound through, and Nathan rode and tried not to think about his shoulder, and thought instead about what he would say when he sat down in front of Tom Aldridge and told the truth about everything. He would say it plainly. He would not dress it up or minimize it, or try to place it in a frame that made him look like something other than what he'd been. He had been a man who ran with men who did bad things, and he had done some of those things himself. And then he had stopped and he had spent 4 years trying to be something else. And he had failed Thomas Reed by arriving one day too late. And now he had 2 infant girls alive and a ledger in federal hands and a woman riding beside him who had kept Daniel's records in a tin box under the kitchen floor for 9 years, waiting for the moment when it would matter. It would matter now. He would make sure of it. Evelyn rode beside him for miles without speaking, which he had learned was not absence from her but presence. She was there the way solid things are there, without announcement. At some point in the afternoon, she said quietly, "Whatever happens in that room, you don't have to face it the same way you faced everything else." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, That alone was what you had available. It doesn't have to be what you choose. He held that for a mile or so. The horses moved. The escort rode ahead and behind, giving them the privacy of the middle of a column. Evelyn, he said. I know, she said. Let's get through tomorrow first. And then, she said. The lights of Casper appeared in the valley below them as the last of the daylight went out of the sky, and Nathan Cole rode toward them thinking that Victor Hale had burned Thomas Reed's house to the ground to destroy a record and had instead started a fire he could not control, and that the fire had traveled in the hands of a dying man through a blizzard and landed in a woman's barn, and from there had traveled in a tin box and a young man's testimony to the office of a federal marshal, and that tomorrow morning that fire would have a name and a charge and a judge's signature. He rode down the hill toward the lights and did not look back at the dark behind him, because the dark was where he'd been, and tomorrow was where he was going. Tom Aldridge was not what Nathan had expected. He had expected someone large, or someone severe, or someone who carried federal authority the way some men carried a gun, visibly, always, as the first thing you noticed. Aldridge was none of those things. He was a slight man in his mid-50s with a neat gray mustache and the tired, careful eyes of someone who had spent decades sorting true things from false ones and had grown particular about the difference. He shook Nathan's hand and Evelyn's hand and showed them into a back office in the federal building in Casper that smelled of coal smoke and old paper, and he sat them both down and poured coffee without asking whether they wanted it, and then he put Garrett's ledger on the table between them. It was a plain thing. Brown cover, no markings on the outside, the kind of book you could buy in any dry goods store for 15 cents. Nathan looked at it. I've spent the last 6 hours reading it, Aldridge said. He sat down across from them and put his hands flat on the table. I want you to understand what we're dealing with before I ask you anything, because what's in here is not just Victor Hale. It goes further than Hale. Nathan said, How much further? Aldridge opened the ledger to a page near the middle. He turned it so Nathan and Evelyn could read it. The entries were in Garrett's handwriting, precise, small, the handwriting of a man who thought of documentation as a professional matter. Each entry had a date, a set of initials, and a brief description of action taken. Some entries had dollar amounts beside them. Nathan read 3 entries and understood. The county assessor, he said. Among others, Aldridge said, 2 county commissioners, a circuit court judge, not in this county, in the next one north, a deputy land registrar in Cheyenne. He paused. And 2 names I won't say aloud in this room until I have more men around me. Evelyn said, How many families? Aldridge looked at her. In the ledger specifically, 11. The Reed property is listed, the Carter property is listed. Evelyn went very still. Your husband's transaction with Caldwell, Aldridge said more quietly. It's in here. The Pritchard dispute is in here. The outcome of the county court case. He paused. The judge who ruled against your husband received $400 3 weeks before the decision. The room was quiet. Outside the window, Casper went about its evening business, indifferent. Evelyn's hands were in her lap and Nathan could see them from where he sat. Not shaking, not clenched, just still. The stillness of someone absorbing something they already knew, already suspected, already carried, and now had confirmed in ink by the hand of the man who had arranged it. Daniel, she said. It wasn't a question, it was just the name. Aldridge said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. She nodded once, the small, precise nod of someone who is not going to allow themselves to come apart in a federal office. Nathan watched her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, because this was the kind of knowledge that lands in a person and rearranges things permanently, and words offered from outside that process are at best useless and at worst intrusive. After a moment, she said, What do you need from me? Aldridge looked at her with the careful respect of a man who recognized what he was seeing. Your husband's records, he said, and your testimony about the Pritchard case and the Caldwell sale. Combined with what's in this ledger, we can establish the pattern going back 9 years. That pattern is what allows us to charge Hale not just for Thomas Reed, but for the full scope of what he's been doing in this territory. He paused. We can make it so none of it can be separated out. No single crime he can argue was an aberration, all of it together in front of a federal judge. Then you have it, she said. All of it. Aldridge turned to Nathan. And you, he said, I need everything you can give me about Hale's operation from the inside. The years with Doyle's outfit, how Hale used independent contractors to distance himself, the specific jobs you know about, and who carried them out. Nathan said, "You understand what I'm putting on the table when I do that." "I do," Aldridge said. "I can't give you a clean slate. I don't have the authority to wipe what you've done in other jurisdictions. What I can do is document your full cooperation and the circumstances of the Reed case, your testimony, your role in protecting the children, your voluntary surrender of information. A federal judge weighs that. It won't disappear your history, but it changes the shape of it in ways that matter practically." Nathan had known this was how it would be. He had not let himself hope for anything more. "All right," he said. He talked for 2 hours. Aldridge's deputy took notes in shorthand, and Aldridge himself listened with the particular quality of attention that Nathan associated with people who are building something in their heads as they listen, sorting, connecting, placing each piece in relation to the others. Nathan told it without embellishment and without self-protection. He named names. He gave dates where he had them and approximations where he didn't, and he said clearly which was which. He described 3 specific jobs he had participated in, the nature of them, and the fact that in 2 of those 3 cases no one had been physically harmed. The 3rd case he described in plain terms without excusing it. When he was done, the room was quiet for a moment. Aldridge said, "Frank Cray." "He's in the territory," Nathan said. "He was repositioning south of the Carter Ranch as of yesterday morning. I don't know where he went after that." "We'll find him," Aldridge said. He said it with the confidence of someone who had found people before. "He's not my primary concern tonight. Hale is." "You're moving on Hale now?" Evelyn said. "Tomorrow morning," Aldridge said, "before he can get word from Garrett about the ledger. Garrett has been held without communication since this afternoon, but I don't know how long that holds. Hale has lawyers who will come looking, and when they can't reach Garrett, they'll go to the compound to warn him." He stood. "I need you both here tomorrow. After Hale is in custody, your testimony goes in front of a federal judge. That's the thing that makes it stick." He let them go for the night, with a deputy posted at the hotel 2 streets over where he'd arranged rooms. Nathan walked beside Evelyn through the cold Casper streets, and neither of them spoke for half a block. Then Evelyn said, $400. Nathan said, "Yes." "He killed Daniel for $400, she said. "Not with heat, with the flat, terrible clarity of something finally reduced to its actual dimensions. Not even for the land, not yet. Just to make the case go the way he wanted so he could position himself to take the land later. Daniel was just a step. Something Hale needed moved." "Yes," Nathan said. She walked for another half block. "I need you to know," she said, "that I am not all right now. I want to be clear about that because I have been very controlled throughout this, and I need someone to know that the control is not the same as being all right." "I know," he said. "Good," she said. "I just needed to say it to someone." They walked the rest of the way to the hotel without talking, and Nathan thought about the different kinds of strength people carry and how rarely the most important kind is visible. Evelyn had been holding Daniel's death at arm's length for 9 years, not because she was hard, but because she was still surviving, and now she had a ledger entry with a dollar figure, and she was walking through a cold street in Casper at night and holding herself together by the same sheer stubbornness that had kept her on that ranch alone through 4 winters, and he thought that was one of the most human things he had ever seen. He slept badly. His shoulder kept him half awake for most of the night, and when he did sleep, he dreamed in fragments. The yard at Broken Creek, the dark of the barn, the sound of Cray's voice outside saying, "You just used your one warning shot." He woke before dawn and lay in the narrow hotel bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about what today would require. Aldridge moved at first light. Nathan and Evelyn were not part of the arrest. Aldridge had been clear about that, and clear about why. Victor Hale's lawyers would look for any procedural irregularity that could contaminate the case, and having 2 civilian witnesses present at the arrest of the primary defendant was the kind of thing lawyers sharpened their arguments against. Nathan and Evelyn waited at the federal building while Aldridge and 6 deputies rode south toward Hale's compound, and the waiting was its own particular form of difficulty. They heard the news 3 hours later when Aldridge's deputy came back ahead of the main group. Hale was in custody. He had not resisted, which surprised Nathan until he thought about it and realized it didn't. Victor Hale was not the kind of man who fired guns himself. He ordered. He nodded. He had spent 20 years building a machine that kept his hands clean, and when the machine stopped protecting him, he didn't have the instincts of a man who knew how to fight with his body. He had come out of his compound in a good coat and asked to speak to his lawyers, and Aldridge had told him he could speak to his lawyers at the federal building in Casper, and that had been that. Frank Cray was taken the same morning, 20 miles south of Millhaven, trying to cross into the next territory. The deputy who brought word of it was matter-of-fact about the details, and Nathan registered the information and let it settle and felt nothing dramatic about it. Just the closing of an open door, the removal of a specific threat from the landscape. The hearing before the federal judge took 2 days. Nathan gave his testimony on the first day. He sat in a chair in a formal room with Judge Harlan Morse presiding, a thin, white-haired man with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that rushing proceedings was how you gave defendants grounds for appeal. And he told the truth. All of it. He had spent 48 hours preparing to do this, and the preparation had not made it easier, only more precise. He said what he'd done. He said what he'd seen. He said what he knew about Hale's operation from the years when he'd been adjacent to it. Hale's lawyers objected frequently, and Morse sustained some of the objections and overruled others, and Nathan kept his voice level and his account straight through all of it. Hale sat at his table across the room and looked at Nathan with an expression that was not quite contempt and not quite fear. It was the expression of a man calculating, still calculating, even now, because calculating was the only mode he had. Nathan met the look twice and then stopped meeting it, because Hale's eyes were not the thing that mattered in this room. What mattered was the words and the record and the pages of Daniel Carter's handwritten documentation that Evelyn had put on the judge's table the previous evening. Evelyn testified on the second morning. Nathan sat in the gallery and watched her sit in that chair and speak with the controlled exactness of someone who had been rehearsing this testimony in her head for 9 years without knowing when she'd need it. She was not dramatic. She was not emotional in any visible way. She laid out the sequence of the Caldwell sale, the Pritchard dispute, the county court decision, and the entry in Garrett's ledger that connected all three to Hale's larger operation, and she did it with the precision of a woman who had kept every piece of paper because she had known, without being able to prove it, that the paper mattered. When Hale's lead lawyer rose to cross-examine her, he began with what Nathan recognized as the standard approach to discrediting a witness whose documentation was too strong to attack directly. He went after her motivations. He suggested her testimony was colored by personal grief. He suggested her husband's records were incomplete. He suggested her presence in this case was not that of a disinterested witness, but of a woman who had been manipulated by a man with a self-interested agenda. And here he gestured toward Nathan in the gallery in a way that was designed to look casual. Evelyn looked at the lawyer. She waited until he had finished his question, which was a long one, and then she said, "My husband kept those records because he was a careful man who had been wronged and who believed that careful record-keeping was the most honest response to dishonesty. He kept them even when the court ruled against him. He kept them when there was no prospect of them ever being useful. He kept them because he thought the truth was worth writing down, even if nobody ever read it." She paused. "He was right. That's my answer." The lawyer tried another angle. She answered that one too, in the same way, directly, without anger, without any of the emotional display that lawyers try to provoke in witnesses to make them seem less reliable. She was the most reliable person Nathan had ever watched in a difficult situation, and he had watched several, and he sat in the gallery and understood that the 4 years she had spent alone on that ranch had not broken her. They had refined her. They had taken away everything that wasn't essential, and what was left was this: a woman who knew exactly what she knew and said it plainly and could not be moved from it. Judge Morse recessed for deliberation on the afternoon of the second day. Nathan and Evelyn sat in the hallway outside the courtroom on a bench that was not comfortable and that neither of them mentioned. "Your testimony was good," Evelyn said. "Yours was better," he said. She almost smiled. It was a near thing. The corners of her mouth moved slightly in a way that, from a woman who held most things back, was something. "What did you feel," she said, "when you were up there?" He thought about it. "Like I was paying something off," he said. "Not clearing it, just paying some of it." He paused. "Does that make sense?" "Yes," she said. Morse's ruling came down the following morning. Victor Hale was formally charged on 14 counts, including murder, conspiracy to commit murder, land fraud, bribery of public officials, and interference with Federal Railroad Administration. He was remanded to federal custody pending trial, which Morse set for 8 months hence. Garrett's plea arrangement, he had been talking since his arrest with the enthusiasm of a man who has decided that self-preservation outweighs loyalty, was accepted and formalized. 6 other men, including 2 county officials named in the ledger, were charged separately. Frank Cray was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder, among other things, and would stand his own trial. Nathan stood in the corridor of the federal building while Aldridge's deputy read through the charges to make sure Nathan understood each one that applied to his own cooperative testimony, and Nathan listened and nodded where nodding was called for. And when it was done, Aldridge himself came out and shook his hand. "You did right," Aldridge said, "coming in, testifying the way you did. It wasn't nothing." "It wasn't enough for Thomas Reed," Nathan said. "No," Aldridge said, "it wasn't. But his daughters are alive, and the man who killed him is going to stand trial in a federal court, and that's more than most people in Thomas Reed's position ever get." He paused. "I've been doing this work long enough to know that more than most is not nothing either." Nathan thought about that. "No," he said, "it's not nothing." He was given a formal document outlining the terms of his cooperation and its recognition by the Federal Marshal's Office. It didn't expunge anything. It didn't pretend the years had been other than what they were. But it existed, and it was real, and it had Aldridge's signature on it, and it meant that Nathan Cole was no longer a man moving through the territory in the way he had been moving for 4 years, always with one eye on who might recognize him, always with the particular wariness of someone who didn't know whether any given day would be the day his past caught up to him. That wariness did not disappear entirely because a document existed. But the document changed the shape of things in ways that mattered practically, as Aldridge had said, and Nathan folded it and put it inside his coat beside whatever remained of his heart. They went back to Millhaven first, because the girls were there. The ride north took a day and a half, and they made it without incident. The roads were watched now, the territory already reshaping itself around the news of Hale's arrest, the way a room reshapes itself when the thing that had been filling it wrong is removed. Nathan noticed it in small ways. Men who would have been at the edge of the road watching them pass were not there. The specific tension that had been in every interaction for the past week was gone, replaced by something that wasn't exactly peace, but was the absence of active threat, which after what they'd been through felt almost like the same thing. Ridley was still in Millhaven. He was helping Cal, the deputy, with something practical, repairing the fence along the road at the edge of town. The kind of work that needs no particular skill and clears the head. He looked up when they rode in and stood with a fence post in his hands and said nothing for a moment. "Done?" he said. "Done enough," Nathan said. Ridley nodded. He went back to the fence. Nathan understood. This was how a 22-year-old processed the fact that he had walked into something large and gotten out the other side with himself more or less intact. He worked with his hands and let the rest settle on its own schedule. Margaret Hoyle's door opened before they reached it. The girls were healthy. That was the first thing Nathan saw. Not just alive, not just surviving, but genuinely healthier than they had been. Their cheeks with color and their eyes with the bright specific focus of babies who were eating well and sleeping in warmth. Margaret had apparently been feeding them on a schedule she had determined through decades of experience and which she described to Nathan with the firm conviction of someone who does not expect to be second-guessed. And he told her she was right about everything, which was both tactically wise and also true. He held them both together for the first time, one in each arm, which his shoulder protested and which he ignored. And they were heavier than they'd been in the barn at the beginning of all this, heavier than they'd been in the carrier on the walk to Millhaven. He stood in Margaret's parlor with both of them and let himself simply be standing there, not running, not bleeding, not waiting for the next sound from outside. Just standing in a warm room with 2 children who were alive because a man named Thomas Reed had hidden them in a root cellar and because Nathan had run. "Their names," Evelyn said, from where she stood near the doorway. She had a small piece of paper in her hand. "I asked Margaret to check the county birth registry. She had a contact in the next town who keeps records." She looked down at the paper. "Anna and Clara. The older one is Anna. The younger one is Clara. She named her after her mother." Nathan looked down at the baby on his right. Anna. He had been calling her the one who grabbed his coat, which was accurate but insufficient. "Anna," he said quietly. She looked at him. And Clara. Clara was already asleep against his left arm, which was either very trusting or very exhausted, and probably both. He stood there a minute longer and then said, "I need to talk to you." Not to the babies, to Evelyn, who came and took Clara from his left arm so that the arm could rest. And he carried Anna to the chair in the corner, the same chair he'd sat in 2 nights ago, and sat down. "Thomas had a sister," he said, "in Missouri. I don't know if she knows what happened. I need to find out. I need to try to reach her." He looked at Anna's face. "If she wants them. If she can take them." Evelyn sat across from him with Clara. "And if she can't? Then I don't know." "Oh," he said. "I don't know what I can offer them. I don't have a house. I don't have a piece of land with my name on it. I have a cooperative testimony document and a skill set that's mostly useful in situations you don't want to be in." He paused. "I don't know if that's enough to build something real on." Evelyn looked at him. She looked at him with the directness she brought to everything, the willingness to see what was actually there instead of what was easier. "You know what Daniel left me?" she said. "When he died. He left me a ranch with 2 mortgages and a court case I'd lost and $7 in the house. That's what I had. That's what I built from." He said, "That was you." "Yes," she said, "it was me. And I did it alone, which was harder than it needed to be." She paused. "I'm not saying this as a proposal. I'm saying it as a fact. A man who can hold a rifle and fix a fence and carry 2 children through a blizzard without putting them down, and who showed up for a friend too late and has spent every hour since trying to make that right. That man has something to build from, whether he can see it or not." The room was warm. Anna had grabbed the front of his coat again, her small fist tight in the fabric. "The ranch," he said. "My ranch," she said, "is falling apart in several specific ways that I have been managing alone and not managing well. The south pasture fence has needed rebuilding for a year. The barn roof has a section that won't survive another winter." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to stay. I'm telling you what's true." "That sounds like asking," he said. "It sounds like telling," she said. "What you do with it is your decision." He looked at her. He thought about the morning in the kitchen when she had said, "I got confused somewhere," and started thinking that getting good at something was the same as wanting it. He thought about the fact that she had not said a single thing to him in the entire week he had known her that was not the truth, and that he had met very few people in his life of whom he could say that. "The sister in Missouri," he said. "I still need to find out." "Yes," she said. "You do. And you should." She looked at Clara in her arms. "But finding out doesn't have to mean—" She stopped. She regrouped. "The girls need a place, a real place, with the same walls around them every morning. Whatever that looks like, it should be settled before winter." She paused. "That's all I'm saying." What she was saying was more than that, and they both knew it, and she was choosing to say the smaller version first, which he understood. She was a careful woman. She did not lay everything out at once. She had kept a tin box under the kitchen floor for 9 years and had not opened it until the moment was right. He could be patient. "I'll write to Missouri," he said. "From here, before we go back." "All right," she said. He wrote the letter that evening at the desk in Marsh's office, while Ridley sat in the corner sharpening something and Marsh read through paperwork at his own desk. Nathan wrote it slowly, picking his words with care, because the woman in Missouri was going to read this and learn that her brother was dead, and the letter had to carry that, and it also had to carry the rest. That his daughters were alive, that they were healthy, that someone was looking after them, that there was someone she could write to. He signed it with his name, his real name, all of it, Nathan Cole. No apology for what the name was and what it had been, just the name and the address of Evelyn's ranch, and the instruction to write there when she had a response. He sealed it and handed it to Marsh to send, and then he sat at the desk for a moment after. Ridley said from the corner, "You staying around?" "For a while," Nathan said. Ridley nodded. He kept sharpening. "The south fence line," he said. "On the Carter ranch. I know fencing." Nathan looked at him. "Just saying," Ridley said, "if the work needs doing." They rode back to the ranch 4 days later, Nathan and Evelyn and the 2 girls, with Ridley following 2 hours behind because he said he wanted to stop in at the Millhaven General Store first, which Nathan suspected was his way of not making the arrival a bigger thing than it needed to be. The ranch was cold and still when they reached it. The fire had been out for days, and the house held the deep cold of an uninhabited space, and the first thing Evelyn did was build the fire back up, moving with the automatic efficiency of someone returning to a known task. Nathan brought the girls in from the cold and settled them in the chair by the hearth, and then he went to work on what needed working on, which was, as Evelyn had described, considerable. The barn roof, the south fence, a window on the east wall of the house that had been letting cold in through a gap in the frame. These were not dramatic problems. They were the ordinary problems of a life that needed tending, the kind of problems that don't get solved by one large effort but by consistent daily attention, which was a different kind of work than anything Nathan had done for most of his adult life. He found that he did not mind it. He found, after the first week, that he had started waking in the mornings with something that was not quite the same thing as the alertness of a man waiting for the next threat. It was still early, it was close, but it was different in a way that he noticed and did not know the name for yet. Thomas's sister wrote back in 6 weeks. Her name was Ruth, and she was a school teacher in a small town in Missouri, and her letter was 2 pages long and clearly written and full of grief that had not softened itself for the sake of readability. She had not known Thomas was in danger. She had not known about Victor Hale or the water right or any of it, because Thomas had not wanted her to worry, which was Thomas in a single detail, keeping the difficult thing to himself so that the people he loved could stay unworried. Ruth wrote that she loved her nieces and that she wanted to see them, that she would come in the spring when travel was easier. She also wrote, at the end of the letter, "Thomas wrote to me about you. He said you were the most complicated man he knew and that he believed you were going to be all right eventually. I believe that too. Please take care of Anna and Clara until I can get there. And after that, if you're willing, please stay near." Nathan read that letter twice at the kitchen table while Evelyn moved around behind him putting supper together. Then he folded it and set it down. "What does she say?" Evelyn said. "She's coming in spring," he said. "She wants to see them." He paused. "She doesn't want to take them away. She used the word near. She wants people near them." He looked at the letter. "Thomas told her about me." Evelyn set a plate on the table and sat down across from him. "What did he tell her?" "That he thought I was going to be all right eventually," Nathan said. She looked at him steadily. "He was right," she said. Nathan thought about Thomas in the summer yard, the creek running, the laughter that had always been bigger than the space it was in. He thought about what it meant that Thomas had written to his sister about him, had kept faith in him in a letter, had said he believed, had passed that belief down into the hands of a woman in Missouri who would then pass it along to Nathan himself 6 months after Thomas was gone. He thought about the particular stubbornness of a man who refuses to give up on someone, who writes it down so that it outlasts him. He thought that was the most Thomas thing in the world, and that he was grateful for it in a way he would never entirely be able to express. "I'm going to fix the east window this afternoon," he said. "The one by the bedroom." "I know," she said. "I've been watching it let in cold for a month." "You could have said something." "I did," she said. "You weren't here yet." He looked at her. There was something in the way she said it, "You weren't here yet," that was not a complaint and not a statement of blame, but a simple marking of what had been true before and what was different now. He was here now. That was what was different. "Nathan," she said. He waited. She looked at him across the supper table in the kitchen of the ranch she had built alone and kept alone, and which now held 4 people, and was beginning, slowly, in the way things begin when they are not announced but simply started, to be something other than a place she endured. She looked at him and said, "I'm glad you fell down in my barn." He considered this for a moment. "I didn't fall down," he said. "I sat down. There's a difference." "You were on the floor," she said. "I was resting," he said. She looked at him for a moment more, and then she smiled. An actual smile, full and unguarded, the kind she had not let herself have in a long time. It lasted only a few seconds before it settled back into the more familiar, controlled expression. But it had been there, and he had seen it, and he thought that was maybe the most valuable thing he had seen in a week that had contained some remarkable things. Spring came late that year, the way Wyoming spring always does. Reluctantly, in fits and starts, the cold giving ground only when it had to. Ruth arrived in April, A small, neat woman in her late 30s with Thomas's dark eyes and Thomas's way of standing, which was with a kind of settled authority that had nothing to do with size or force. She came off the stage in Mill Haven and saw Nathan standing there and looked at him with the same direct assessment her brother had always used. And then she looked at the girls in the carrier at his chest, and something in her face did what faces do when they contain grief and love at the same time and can't separate them. She spent 2 weeks at the ranch. She held Anna and Clara and talked to them in the soft way that adults talk to babies when they think no one is listening. And she helped with the cooking and the repairs with the practical energy of someone who was not used to sitting still. And she and Evelyn found a working language quickly, the language of women who have built things under difficult conditions and recognize each other across it. She and Nathan talked once, at length, sitting on the porch in the cold evening while Evelyn was inside with the girls. Ruth had asked him to tell her everything, and he had told her everything, from the letter to the ride north, to the yard at Broken Creek that he had arrived at too late, to the barn in the blizzard, to Casper and Aldridge and the courtroom and the judge's ruling. He told her the parts that reflected poorly on him as plainly as he told the others. She listened the way her brother had always listened, without interrupting, without flinching, with the particular quality of attention that made you feel like the words were landing somewhere real. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He would have hated that you blame yourself for the timing." Nathan said nothing. "He was stubborn," she said. "He made his own choices, including the choice not to leave when Hale first started the pressure. He could have sold. He chose not to. And I'm not saying that to forgive you for not arriving in time. I'm saying it because Thomas understood what he was choosing, and he would not want you to carry the weight of his choice on top of your own." She paused. He was not naive. He knew it was dangerous. "He asked for a friend," Nathan said. "I got there and I was too late to be one." "You got there," she said. "That mattered to him. I know it did." She looked out at the dark land. "And you've been a friend to his daughters since, which I think is what he would have asked if he'd been able to ask anything more." Victor Hale's trial ran through the summer. Nathan testified again in Cheyenne before a federal court, a longer and more formal proceeding than the initial hearing, with more lawyers and more days, and the full assembled weight of the documented case. The ledger was entered into evidence. Daniel Carter's records were entered into evidence. Ridley testified. 3 of the men named in the ledger testified under their own plea arrangements. The verdict came down in August. Guilty on 11 of 14 counts. The 3 charges that failed were the ones with the most procedural complexity, where Hale's lawyers had found genuine gaps in the evidentiary chain, and Aldridge had told Nathan before the verdict that he expected this and that it was still enough. Life imprisonment, the judge sentenced. No possibility of early release under federal law for the category of crimes. Nathan heard about it in a letter from Aldridge, sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in late summer, with Anna attempting to eat her own hand beside him in the crib that Ridley had built from good pine over the winter. He read the letter. He set it down. He looked out the window at the pasture where the south fence stood straight and solid, rebuilt. Evelyn came in from outside, her hands dirty from the garden she'd put in along the east wall in May, which had produced better than either of them had expected given the soil. She saw the letter on the table and looked at him. "Done," he said. She read it while she washed her hands at the basin. She read it once, all the way through, and then she folded it and set it on the shelf above the stove where they kept important papers, beside Daniel's records, which Aldridge had returned to her after the trial, and beside Nathan's cooperation document, and beside Ruth's last letter, which had arrived 3 weeks ago and had said she was thinking about coming back in the fall to stay longer, if that was welcome. Evelyn said, "Daniel." Nathan said, "Yes." She stood at the basin for a moment with her back to him, and he did not try to see her face. After a moment she turned around, and her eyes were dry, and she said, "I want to put something at his grave. When this is all settled, I want to go to where he's buried and tell him what happened." "We'll go," Nathan said. "Whenever you want." She nodded. Clara was making a sound from the back room. Not crying, just the particular vocalizing of a baby who has noticed she is alone and has opinions about it. And Evelyn went to get her, and Nathan sat at the table and looked at the letter one more time. There are things in a life that you carry that never get lighter. Nathan had known this for a long time, known it as a fact in the abstract, and he understood it now in a more specific and personal way. that what happened at Broken Creek would not become less true over time, that Thomas would not become less dead, that the years of choices he'd made before the blizzard would not be erased by the choices he'd made after. None of that was going away. But carrying a thing and being buried under it are not the same, and Nathan had spent most of his adult life confusing them, believing that because the weight existed, he would always be bent under it, that the distance between who he had been and who he might become was too far to walk. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong in the specific, demonstrable way of someone who has walked the distance and found himself standing somewhere he would not have believed he could stand. He was here, on this land, in this house, with these two small lives who were beginning to pull themselves upright against the furniture and fall down and try again with the absolute unself-conscious persistence of people who have not yet learned to be afraid of trying. He thought that was something worth watching. He thought he would like to keep watching it for a long time. Ruth came back in October, as she had said she would. She came on the stage to Mill Haven, and Ridley met her there. Ridley, who had by this point become something between a hand and a fixture, who slept in the fixed barn loft 3 nights a week, and who had stopped needing to be told what needed doing and simply did it. He had not become easy or uncomplicated. I was still a young man working out what kind of person he was going to be, and that process was not quiet or settled. And sometimes he disappeared for a day without saying where he'd gone and came back without explanation, and Nathan recognized that as a thing that would work itself out on its own schedule and left it alone. Ruth came in the door of the ranch house in October with her traveling case and her Thomas eyes, and Anna reached for her immediately with both arms from across the room, which made Ruth stop where she was for a moment with her hand over her mouth and her composure doing its best. She set down the case and crossed the room and picked Anna up and held her, and Clara grabbed Ruth's coat from the crib, and the scene was not beautiful in any arranged or composed way. It was cluttered and imperfect, and it was happening in a kitchen that had onions on the stove, and a repaired window on the east wall, and boots by the door, and a fence line visible through the glass that had been built by 3 people who had arrived at this place from different directions and decided, separately and then together, to stay. That evening, with Ruth putting the girls to bed in the back room and Ridley gone to Mill Haven, Evelyn and Nathan stood on the porch in the October cold and looked out at the land. The sky was enormous above the flats. It was that deep dark blue of early evening before the stars fully appear, when the last light is still faintly present, and the first stars are just becoming visible, and the air had the particular sharpness of approaching winter without yet being brutal. "It's going to be a hard winter," she said. "Probably," he said. "The barn will hold," she said. "And the house." "Yes," he said. They stood there. The land was quiet, not empty. He had stopped reading Wyoming's quiet as emptiness, had started hearing what it actually was, which was a very large space being itself, unconcerned. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said. He waited. "About what we are," she said. "What this is." She paused. "I'm not sure I have the right words for it. I don't know that there are standard words." "There don't have to be," he said. "No," she agreed. "But I want you to know that I am—" She stopped. She was the kind of woman who did not land on the easy version of the true thing, and she was not going to do it now. "I'm not afraid of it," she said. "Whatever this is, that's what I want you to know." He looked at her. The last light was doing something to her face, the angle of it, the way it fell. And he thought about the morning she had walked out of the barn door into the blizzard to check the fence lines without being asked, to prepare for men who were coming to kill them both, and how she had done it with no performance of bravery whatsoever, just the straight practical movement of a woman who had identified what needed doing and was doing it. "Neither am I," he said. It was not a declaration. It was not a romantic statement in any formal sense. It was 2 people standing on a porch in the cold being honest with each other, which was what they had been doing since the first morning, and which was, Nathan had come to understand, the only foundation that held. The stars were fully out now. Inside he could hear Ruth's voice from the back room, low and steady, the sound of someone talking to children who are almost asleep. Anna would reach for the familiar grip. Clara would make her sound, and the house would hold all of it, the warmth and the voices, and the small, ordinary living of people who had arrived here by hard roads, and had decided that here, imperfect as it was where they intended to be. A man does not become new. Nathan understood this in a way he had not before. The past does not go away because you do something right. It stays exactly where it is, an accurate record of what you were and what you chose. But you live forward, not backward. And forward is where the fence needs mending and where the children are learning to stand and where the woman beside you has decided she is not afraid, and that has to be, enough to build from. He had been looking for somewhere to belong for long enough that he had stopped believing the search would end. He had been wrong. The search had ended in a barn in a blizzard, without any announcement, without any ceremony, in the moment when a stranger had put her fingers against the side of his neck and found a pulse and decided on the basis of that pulse alone that he was worth saving. He did not take that lightly. He would not take it lightly. The night settled over the Carter ranch, and the lights were on in the house, and the stars were very bright in the way they get in Wyoming when the cold is coming and the air has gone clear and honest. And Nathan Cole stood on the porch and breathed it in and did not look away from any of it.